Chapter 717. There was a table of people under the tree and a ghost on the locust tree. One was a happy face and the other was a sad face. This time, Lu Baijie was too lazy to reprimand him. After Tong Zhuhui left the courtyard, he opened his mouth and said, "Since I already know that Mr. Chao is bringing Princess Jiang Yan to restore West Chu, I have been targeting the Guangling Road's deployment ever since I entered the Ministry of War. If your Highness has the opportunity to see Mr. Chao, I hope that you can apologize for me. This is indeed my duty. I cannot watch with folded arms." Su Fengnian smiled casually and said, "I saw Chao Qingyi once outside the Iron Gate Pass. I'm afraid I won't have the chance to see him again in the next few years. Besides, he may not care about this." Lu Baijie heard the words, Iron Gate Pass, and remained calm. She finished her meal in the dusk and put down her chopsticks. She said softly, "Q sword." Su Fengnian sat where he was and nodded. Xianyuan Qingfeng and Bluebird were sitting at the table with their hands behind their backs. Only Wu was still eating. After the servant took off the red sandalwood sword case and respectfully handed it to Tang Shi, he ran to the door of the courtyard furthest away from the dragon claw locust tree. On one hand, he was annoyed at how arrogant and unreasonable the white-haired crown prince of Bailiang was. On the other hand, he was horrified that he had provoked an unclean otherworldly item. Why did it seem like he was the only one who had seen the red-robed female ghost? Lu Baijie stood with the case horizontally and slapped the end of the sandalwood case with one hand. The sword case and scabbard flew to the servant, leaving behind the last legendary sword made by the Tangxi sword furnace, Ba Xiu. Before Lu Baijie could hold the Ba Xiu ancient sword, she heard the sound of metal clanging. The long sword was dented from the middle of the blade for no reason. Tang Shi was not surprised but happy. She smiled and held the twisted hilt of the ancient sword. She gently shook her wrist and the sword qi rippled. The sword swept through the army. The white sword qi split the air and pushed towards Su Fengnian at the table. However, the sword qi dissipated as soon as it was born. Su Fengnian knocked on the table. Lu Baijie leaned back and swung the Ba Xiu sword in a semicircle. The sword qi was as brilliant as a crescent moon. However, before the crescent sword qi surged out, Lu Baijie took the initiative to return her gang qi to the sword. She slapped the ground with her palm and spun. The tip of the Ba Xiu sword in her hand twisted like a snake. The leaves in the courtyard kept falling and drifted between the two. The tip of the sword was alive, but it was not a straight line. There were 3 leaves on this line, and only the one in the center was crushed into powder. Clearly, this was a superior sword technique. Su Fengnian drew a line on the table with his finger. The flying sword and the sword qi collided, and a cloud of mist spread out. Sword Immortal Tang Shi stepped forward as if she was treading on gang qi. Her sword qi surged, and the fallen leaves on the courtyard were wrapped up by the sword qi. They rose with the wind, and the sword qi became thicker. Lu Baijie abruptly withdrew her sword and threw the Ba Xiu sword to the attendant and the sword case. The attendant hurriedly caught the ancient sword and put it back into the scabbard. Only when he focused his eyes did he see that around his teacher, who was praised for having a divine sword, more than 10 flying swords had stopped trembling slightly. He was shocked. He turned to look at Su Fengnian. Could it be that this guy had been controlling his swords from the beginning to the end? Lu Baijie sat back down at the table and frowned. "Compared to Gangnam-do, why didn't your inner qi improve when we first met? How did you learn the 12 flying swords?" Su Fengnian said frankly, "The Wu family's sword tomb nurtured swords in a different way. After a flying sword embryo was perfected, not to mention a second-rank inner qi, even a third-rank inner qi would be able to control the sword and fly dozens of feet in the air. It was said that the Wu family's young children could kill butterflies with their bamboo horse flying swords, and it wasn't an exaggeration." Lu Baijie smiled and asked, "But how did you manage to nurture 12 flying swords with sword embryos at your disposal in just 1 year? Was there a shortcut to success?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "There were a few coincidences, but I mostly relied on the most clumsy method of grinding. 12 swords. I nurtured them once every 2 hours, and I persisted for more than half a year." Lu Baijie sighed and said, "Only through hardship can one rise above others. The ancients didn't lie to me." Su Fengnian said bitterly, I once reached the Vajra realm, but I've entered the false realm twice. I don't think I'll have any more achievements in the first-rank realm in this lifetime. Lu Baijie asked, 2 false Xian fingers? Su Fengnian smiled and said, 1 false Xian finger and 1 celestial phenomenon. So even if I can make a breakthrough, I'll have to go straight from Vajra realm to Earth Immortal. But I'm not that Buddha. This time, even Lu Baijie's expression changed dramatically. She slapped the table and sighed, what a pity, what a pity. Su Fengnian said, in the future, I won't be able to focus solely on martial arts. I'll just take it as pushing the boat with the current and finding a way out. Chapter 7:18. Lu Baijie shook her head. At first, I didn't believe that Huang Longshi had transferred his fate to Jianghu. But now, the younger generation has sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Whether it's innate talent or fate, they're far better than they were in the past 60 years. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they're the most outstanding in the past 500 years. I had to believe it. I had high hopes for you, hoping that one day you'd be one of the top 10 in the world. This time, I asked you for the sword because if you didn't disappoint me after you answered the sword, I'd pass on my master Yang Yuzhang's sword and the Ba Xiu sword to you. Alas, how could I have known this would happen? Tang Shi Sword Immortal looked sad. She raised her head to look at the dragon claw old locust tree and muttered to herself, the ancient books say that the old locust tree is dark and gloomy. The shade of the locust tree in spring and summer is greenish-black. Fengnian, why do you have an otherworldly item by your side? Aren't you afraid of losing your fate? Su Fengnian calmly said, I don't have any fate left to lose. Now that it hasn't left me, I'm grateful to the point of tears. As for whether it's grateful because it has just gained intelligence, or whether it thinks I'm still a rare commodity, it doesn't matter to me. With this celestial protective talisman, I'll feel more at ease when I enter the capital. Lu Baijie nodded and suddenly smiled. Do you know who the most eye-catching swordsman in the capital is? Su Fengnian asked, isn't it Qi Jiajie and Bai Jiangshan, the famous old foes of Great Peace City? I remember that Qi Jiajie blocked your path with his sword when you entered the capital. Lu Baijie shook her head and said, not these two, but a previously unknown wanderer who challenged the current sword champion of the Wu clan, Wu Luding. It seemed like he was picking up a soft persimmon, so he bypassed Wu Luding and challenged his female sword attendant. Unexpectedly, both of them became famous in a single battle. The woman named Cui Hua actually used the 2-sleeve green snake that became a legend after the death of the god of swords, Li Chungang. As for the wanderer, he was also quite good. It was said that he only used 2 swords, and even though he was defeated, it was still an honorable defeat. I missed that match. Later on, the wanderer went to challenge Bai Jiangshan and Qi Jiajie for 2 more matches. I personally went to watch both matches. This young man's swordsmanship is extraordinary. Those 2 sword moves can be said to be the pinnacle of swordsmanship. It's as if when one cultivates the sword to such a level, one would be able to stand at the very top and look down on all the other mountains, and one would no longer have the desire to climb to the top to admire the scenery. But everyone can see that no matter who he fights, he only has the ability to use 2 sword moves. Back when Wang Xinji first entered Jianghu, she walked the complicated path of learning from various masters. That young swordsman is different. It can be said that he is the complete opposite. Su Fengnian said bluntly, it's 2 sword moves rather than 1 sword move. He has skipped a large part of the path that most swordsmen would probably never reach the end of in their lifetime. It's obvious that he has the guidance of a top master, otherwise he would not be so conceited. If he is really left with only 1 sword move, I'm afraid it will be a big unreasonable hand. At that time, only Sword Crown Wu Luding, Beimang's Sword Aura, Dragon and Tiger Xianxia, Wudong Wang Xiaoping, and a few others would be able to fight with him. Entering the Dao through the sly path, why do I feel that it's a bit like Huang Sanjia? Speaking of this, Su Fengnian's attitude waned. Didn't she also disdain to ride a sword and directly barge into the gate of the imperial sword of half a sword immortal? Lu Baijie smiled and said, then it's fortunate that this young man came to challenge me 3 days later. Otherwise, wouldn't I have lost without a doubt? Su Fengnian was stunned and said, that guy came to you? Sword Fairy Tongshi smiled and said, I just wanted to give you the sword so that I could find an excuse to hide. In order to watch his 2 sword moves during the day, the Imperial censor has already flown into the palace like snowflakes. It can't be done more than 3 times. Su Fengnian whispered, You wanted me to replace you in the sword fight? Lu Baijie nodded and said calmly, Didn't the millions of people in the capital not believe that you could kill the 5th raccoon? Su Fengnian said helplessly, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Uncle Lu. Lu Baijie did not say anything to comfort him. Instead, she added fuel to the fire and said, That's why it's better for me to personally participate in this sword fight. Take it as a farewell to your hopeless swordsmanship. You can forget about the tyrannical Xiu sword. As for my master Yang Yuzhang's swordsmanship, as long as you don't cause any trouble before the Lidong observance ceremony, I can still consider it. Su Fengnian whispered, The tree wants to be still, but the wind will not stop. With a sigh, Lu Baijie got up and left. The little attendant did not dare to underestimate the white-haired young man like before. He hurriedly followed his teacher out of the yard, feeling wronged and suspicious. He lowered his voice and said softly, Teacher? Sword Fairy Tang, she gave him another chestnut. If you have a clear conscience, there are no ghosts. The young man with the sword case lowered his head and muttered, But that red-robed ghost hanged on the old pagoda tree like a hanged ghost. It's really scary. Go back and reflect on your mistakes. Copy books. Teacher, why does the heir have white hair? Why don't you ask him yourself? I don't dare. He already knows how to use a flying sword. I didn't treat him well in Gangnam-do either. What if he's narrow-minded and comes to take my head with his sword? Who's going to carry your sword for you in the future? Didn't you also not believe that he killed the master of Troop Raising Mountain? You even made a bet with Xiao Chu in private. How much did you lose? Hey, it's only a few coins of silver. I think I lost too little. Look at you. When you're young, you're lucky to have met the girl you like. If you're confident that you can make her happy and stable in the future, then hurry up and say it. I haven't studied enough. I'm not learned enough, and I haven't learned the sword art well. Teacher, why don't we do it a little later? As you wish. Lu Baijie nodded and said goodbye to Tong Ziliang, who was guarding outside the yard. She walked out of the post house and turned to look at the dragon-clawed pagoda tree. In the medicine book, there was a budding pagoda tree. When boiled in boiling water, it could make people live forever without turning white. But what was the use? The children of the Su family realized that the one who suffered the most was Su Fengnian. Chapter 719. Under the shade of the old pagoda tree, Xianyuan Qingfeng asked tentatively, Is the person visiting Horseway your Uncle Lu, or the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Lu Baijie? Su Fengnian said softly, It's all right. Using the identity of Sword Immortal Tang Shi, asking for the sword and gifting it to clear our relationship. Lowering myself to greet a junior as a senior, I don't need to meddle with Lu Daolin, the Minister of Rights. Uncle Lu isn't an ordinary person, but he's in a high position in the imperial court. He has to think for his family, so he can't do both. I know what's good for me, so I won't embarrass him. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't dare to visit me personally under the emperor's nose. They'd probably just find someone to pass on the message to Horseway. Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered, Officials are indeed much more cunning than the Yellow River. Su Fengnian laughed. That's already considered simple and straightforward. Xianyuan Qingfeng skimmed over this foul matter and asked curiously, Who do you think will be the first to come to Horseway to make trouble for you? Su Fengnian thought for a moment, then said slowly, There are many influential people in the capital, but those who dare to come to my door directly can be counted on one hand. Princess Sui Zhu, who is absolutely irreconcilable with me, is definitely one of them. Then there are a few others. As he said this, Tong Ziliang knocked on the door a few times, then reported, Your Highness, Her Highness the Princess is visiting Horseway incognito. Xianyuan Qingfeng was stunned. Su Fengnian, who had always been a jinx, stood up with a self-deprecating expression. I'll go take a look. Princess Sui Zhu Zhaofengya had already arrived at the outer courtyard. Her retainer was still that noble from Dongyue, Zhang Huan, who carried the twin sabers at his waist. He had gone to Sun Diao Temple, one of Wudong's 12 supervisors. After returning to the palace, he quickly lost his power and faded out of sight. She saw Su Fengnian, who had nothing but a jade belt around his waist, and clicked her tongue. "You don't even dare to wear a saber now? What, are you afraid someone will challenge you to a duel and expose you? You even said you killed the 5th raccoon of Mount Tibbing. Who are you trying to fool?" Su Fengnian narrowed his phoenix eyes, which many women could only dream of, and smiled. "If you believe it, then it's—" Zhao Fengya was furious. Furious. "Uncle Su Ziliang, why did you come here? Don't you think it's embarrassing?" Su Fengnian said indifferently, "Su Xiao asked you to take me to try some snacks in the capital. I think we should forget about it." Zhao Fengya spat. "You're such a big pile of dog shit. I can't wait to take a detour." Of the Princess Zhao. Of Zhao's. Of the Fengya of you. Of Xianyuan Qingfeng stood behind Su Fengnian with a smirk. He was obviously gloating. Zhang Huan, who had 2 Changdang swords at his waist, did not dare to let his guard down when he saw Su Fengnian. When he saw the young lady in purple, it was as if he was facing a great enemy. Her Royal Highness, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, was really suffering in silence for provoking others. Jianghu was different from officialdom. In officialdom, the more cunning the old fox was, the more vicious he was, and the more respected he was. In Jianghu, it was better to bully a white-bearded old man than a young man. After the Jianghu people passed their prime, most of them were like chess pieces. Their level of improvement was much lower than when they were young. The Crown Prince of Northern Liang was a far cry from the Wudong Mountain. Zhang Huan had already felt that he couldn't fathom the Crown Prince's strength. Moreover, there was also the seductive and gloomy woman. Her aura was so strong that Zhang Huan didn't even need to draw his saber to admit defeat. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "That's good. I don't need to dirty the princess's feet. Everyone is happy." Princess Sui Zhu turned around and said an earth-shattering prophecy, "How dare you kill the prince? I'd like to see how you, Su Fengnian, can walk out of Great Peace City alive." Su Fengnian looked up at the empty autumn sky and said casually, "Look, a sparrow came and left." Zhao Fengya turned around angrily. Zhang Huan did not dare to stop her. She walked to the bottom of the stairs and pointed at Su Fengnian, who was standing on the stairs. "Say that again." Su Fengnian lowered his head and smiled at the tip of the shrewish and arrogant lady's small nose. Her freckles were small and playful. "I was talking about a sparrow. What does it have to do with the princess?" Zhao Fengya did not turn her head and shouted, "Zhang Huan, kill him." Zhang Huan had no choice but to slowly draw a relatively long sword. Then there was nothing. Confused, Princess Sui Zhu turned her head to look. Just as she was about to reprimand him, she saw a scene that made her shriek. Behind Zhang Huan, a female ghost in a crimson robe was floating. She was laughing happily as she stretched out her 6 arms. One of them pressed down on Zhang Huan's arm that was pulling out the knife, while the other pressed down on Zhang Huan's head. Like most women in the royal family, Zhao Fengya believed in Huang Lao Tzu and immortals. She was so frightened that she retreated on the spot. She knocked against the stairs and fell backward. She subconsciously closed her eyes to wait for the pain, but she fell into a warm embrace. When she opened her eyes, she saw a face that she had never seen so close. A strand of white hair fell to the tip of her nose. It was soft and ticklish. Chapter 720. It was the end of autumn in the 6th year of Yonghong's reign. Today's court assembly was the last grand court assembly before the beginning of winter. Other than the 6 kings entering the capital, almost all of the officials outside the court rolled into the capital. Among them was the General Gu Jiantang, who was rumored to hand over the position of Minister of War. The famous general of the spring and autumn period, Lu Xingxiang. The rest of the generals who were still alive all put on their court uniforms and followed the flood as the sky darkened. They entered the imperial road from the mansions in all directions and slowly flowed to the outside of the imperial palace. Great Peace City was the center of the world. It became the imperial road for the bride's waist. It was 16 miles long and was without a doubt the most majestic central axis in history. The 9 meridians and 9 latitudes led to the front of the court and the back of the market. The buildings on the central axis were thicker and more majestic than those of previous dynasties. The Zayamawi post house was located between the inner and outer city. It was less than half a mile away from the Yong and Gate Bridge on the central axis. The river under the bridge was called the Dragon Whisker Ditch. The people said that the water in the capital formed the Dragon Whisker here. However, Chong Hua of the Liang dynasty used a bridge to subdue the water dragon. An inconspicuous carriage followed the imperial road and slowly drove to the Zhao family urn outside the main gate of the imperial palace. Outside the first gate of the imperial palace, there were 2 archways named Fu Wen Zhen Wu. The Ministry of War, Ministry of Justice, and other Yamen offices were named Fu Wen Zhen Wu. The Ministry of Rights, Ministry of Revenue, and Hanlin Academy were named Fu Wen Zhen Wu. They were named Fu Wen Zhen Wu on the right. This old man of the Song dynasty used to write Fu Wen Zhen Wu. Today's morning court assembly was very grand. There was almost no place to stand near the Zhao family urn. It was filled with all kinds of carriages and servants. The Liang dynasty had been peaceful for 20 years. There were many unwritten rules regarding the morning court assembly. The higher the carriage was, the closer it was to the walls of the imperial palace, while the lower the carriage was further away. Many civil and military officials who were neither high nor low were familiar with the situation of the court assembly. They just walked to the court assembly to avoid hurting the harmony. They did not have to fight with others for seats. It was not easy to be an official in the capital under the emperor's feet. There were no less than 1,000 people in the grand lineup. Among them, there were old men in their 60s who had gray hair but had never been able to cross the threshold of the 5th rank. There were old men in their 30s who had a bright future and were already 4th-rank officials. There were even some in their 40s who were favored by God and held power in their hands. There were nobles with high social status, and there were also royal relatives who wore embroidered robes. Some people joked that if there was an immortal on the earth who could randomly slaughter people in every morning court session, the Liang dynasty would suffer a great loss. There were also some who joked that if they could take the jade pendants of these officials into their pockets, it would be a huge fortune. As for the joke, once you get to know the hundreds of faces outside the city gate, you will have figured out the background of the Liang dynasty. The blue-eyed Zhang Julu led the Zhang clique, the Gu clique led by the great general Gu Jiantang, the legacy clique without a leader after Sun Shiji left the capital, and the green clique that collapsed with a bang. These were only the rough divisions on the surface. Internally, there was a tangled mess of various princes' cliques, foreign relatives' cliques, Hanlin Huangmin cliques, imperial college cliques, imperial censors' cliques, Enyin cliques, and new scholars' cliques. Some were deep-rooted and enduring for a long time, while others were declining and losing power. No one dared to say that they could make ends meet left and right in this big muddy pond where fish and dragons mix together. Even Grand Secretary Zhang Julu did not dare to say so. The city gate was closed and had not been opened yet. More than 1,000 people who were qualified to enter the imperial court stood in their positions one after another. There was no lack of slippery people who were still mingling in various circles and talking. But most of the officials felt the atmosphere of a storm in the city. They held their breath and concentrated their mind, being exceptionally quiet. Occasionally, they had some enlightenment and whispered to each other, but they were very careful and only whispered to the cliques around them. The carriage that got off the horse steed came a little late, so it was extremely difficult to find any gaps. It could only stop far away, and a man in white who was suspected of violating the etiquette walked down. A dozen or so officials who were afraid of missing the court meeting hurriedly ran past, not even having the time to take a look. A middle-aged, dark-skinned fat man was having a particularly hard time, panting heavily. Just as he brushed past the white-haired man, he bent over with his hands on his knees, sweating profusely. Looking at the patch on his court robe, he was a 5th-rank chancellor of heavenly strategy. He could be considered a high-ranking official in the directorate of the Qingshui Yamen. After all, the left chancellor, Huan Wen, was only a 3rd-rank chancellor. However, the fat man's bulging buttocks were so swollen that his court robe was about to burst open. It really couldn't be considered elegant. He lowered his head and panted like a cow. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the man beside him slowly walking forward. There was an uncommon jade belt around his waist. This made the dark-skinned fat man, who had no talent for currying favor in officialdom but had a pair of fiery golden eyes. Strange. Could it be that he was a distant descendant of one of the branches of the Zhao family? If it wasn't for the fact that the Zhao family had an extremely distant relationship with the previous emperor's branch, they wouldn't have settled down here and walked to court. The dark-skinned fat man hurriedly looked up and became even more puzzled. It was a young man with gray hair. Although the dark-skinned fat man's appearance was shabby, he was a warm-hearted man. He gritted his teeth and walked forward, whispering, "Sir, allow me to say one more thing. I've never heard of your embroidered robe before. Please don't use it rashly. If this sir inherits the title of a prince of the previous dynasty, you can't wear this court robe right away. There will be many imperial censors and eunuchs staring at you if you walk a few steps forward." The fatty's words were too careless. It was no wonder that he could only work in the imperial college, where it was extremely difficult for him to make a name for himself. The white-haired man turned his head to look at him and dismissed it with a smile. Perhaps the dark-skinned fatty had a stubborn personality, as he nagged endlessly, "Sir, you really shouldn't be so careless." A few years ago, there was a distant son of a royal prince who hadn't seen the world, and no one talked to him about the rules. In the end, he went to court according to the old calendar. Before he even entered the door, he was stripped of his official robe and demoted 2 ranks on the same day. Today is the most important court session in more than a decade. Sir, you really should listen to my advice and quickly go back and change into a set of court robes. It's better to be late and be punished than to be wrong and be beaten. I see that official robe of yours. If placed in the current Yonghong era, only the prime minister and some of the great scholars would wear it to court. The white-haired man frowned and walked forward in silence. The dark-skinned fatty who was walking on his right caught a glimpse of the saber hanging at the young man's waist. He slapped his thigh hard and said with a sad face as if his family had suffered a disaster, "I say, sir, you really can't be a coward anymore. Going to court with a saber, you are..." The white-haired man in the white official robe was naturally the crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, who was attending the court session of Liang for the first time in his life. He chuckled softly and said, "Mr. Chancellor, are you saying that I'm courting death?" The dark-skinned fatty smiled embarrassedly and waved his hand hard. He said awkwardly, "I can't afford to be chancellor, and I can't afford to be Mr. Chancellor." The dark-skinned fatty, who was equivalent to an assistant minister in the Imperial College, finally didn't continue to insensibly mention that he had overstepped his boundaries. After all, he wasn't so blind as to be at the bottom of a pot. However, it was obvious that the dark-skinned fatty was worried about being implicated. He subconsciously distanced himself from Su Fengnian, but his conscience was really tormenting him. After walking for a while, he took only 50 or 60 steps and said in a low voice with a bitter face, "I say, sir, may I take the liberty to ask, where do you work? Do you have a solid backer in the court? Can you talk to a noble in the palace? If you don't have the last 2, I really advise you not to go to the morning court. The capital is not like other places. There are many rigid rules." Chapter 721. Su Fengnian, who had a Bailiang saber hanging from his waist, chuckled softly. "This is indeed my first time entering the capital. No one has reminded me of the rules. My father is still alive and this set of clothes was sent to my residence by the imperial court at the last minute. I shouldn't have broken any rules. As for the saber, if it really did break the imperial court, I'll just take it as a lesson. At worst, I won't enter the city gate or go to the palace hall and leave the capital with my tail between my legs. In any case, when I entered the capital, I didn't see any officials from the Ministry of Rights receiving me." Hearing that the python clothes were newly bestowed by the imperial court, the dark-skinned fatty felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He thought that this young man, who didn't know the fierceness of a tiger, would definitely be stopped outside the city gate. Mending the pen after the sheep were lost, he raised his thumb and praised, "Let's not talk about other things. This young man has enough courage and boldness." Su Fengnian and the dark-skinned fatty walked together, slowly walking at the end of the central axis of the road. Although the dark-skinned fatty was poor as an official, he was still a noble who had entered the first-class imperial college. He still had the qualifications to walk a few dozen steps forward. Don't underestimate the significance of these few dozen steps. How many officials in the capital were ranked at the bottom the first time they entered the imperial court? They stood at the furthest distance and still ended up so miserable on their last visit. Being even one step closer to the city gate was a great blessing. Otherwise, why did they say that outside the imperial court, the pot calling the kettle black? The more they walked forward, the more the dark-skinned fatty felt that the atmosphere was strange. This made the imperial college's chancellor of heavenly strategies, who was used to being ignored and looked down upon, feel uncomfortable all over. He walked straight forward. Following the young heir who had popped out of nowhere, it was as if they were splitting the river and cutting the waves. Some of the officials who had originally looked down on him with their noses in the air now had complicated expressions in their eyes. Their expressions were abnormally stiff. They tore apart the line on both sides and retreated a few more steps. The dark-skinned fatty had already seen the faces of most of his colleagues in the imperial college. Just as he was about to sneak in and shut his mouth as usual, he saw that the left chancellor of the imperial college, Huan, was actually not with the grand secretary this time. Instead, he was looking at him with a smile. This made the dark-skinned fatty, who was most afraid of Chancellor Huan's unique smile, feel his hair stand on end. The little chancellor, who had become a laughingstock because of his poor appearance, approached the imperial college's team. The left chancellor, who was privately known as Lord Huan, patted the fatty's shoulder and laughed. "Wang Tong Lu, you're really something." Many of his colleagues from the imperial college beside him also had a playful look in their eyes, which made the dull dark fatty even more confused. The skinny left chancellor smiled and said, "Bronze Furnace, when did you get on board with Bailiang? You've been hiding your strength. Don't forget this old man when you're successful in the future." Wang Tong Lu scratched his head in confusion and asked in confusion, "Old man, what are you talking about? I don't understand." Huan cast a sidelong glance at the young man who should have died in the womb 21 years ago. He curled his lips and joked, "Look at that one. Have you been wondering all along the way why that brat dares to wear a white python robe and carry a sword to court?" Wang Tong Lu nodded his head vigorously like a chick pecking at rice. "Yes, yes. I've been trying to persuade him for a long time, but that young master only smiled at me and didn't listen to me. It made me very anxious." Even though the left chancellor had experienced the ups and downs of the officialdom, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry having such a slow-witted subordinate. He slapped Wang Tong Lu's shoulder heavily and said, "You idiot, you must have gone silly from helping to compile the new calendar. Didn't you see that on the way here, everyone looked at you as if you were the god of plague?" Wang Tong Lu was so anxious that his face flushed red. One could see the redness on his black charcoal face, which was enough to see that he was burning with impatience. "Old man, don't keep me in suspense. If you don't tell me, I'll say my stomach hurts and I don't dare to go to court." The left chancellor laughed loudly. "That brat is the Bailiang heir who was said to have taken the heads of Su Huainan and Diwu Raccoon. This fox assuming the tiger's might is a once-in-a-century occurrence." The dark fatty's legs went soft. Fortunately, Huan was there to support him. The old man laughed angrily. "Quickly stand up straight. I'm already so old, I can't support your 200 pounds of autumn fat." Wang Tong Lu stretched his neck to look at that snow-white back and said as if he was mourning for a loved one, "Old man, my stomach really does hurt." The left chancellor Huan had always been known to be protective of his calf among the important officials of the capital. He scolded jokingly, "What a disgrace. To think that your body of talent and your body of flesh are of the same weight. In a moment, you'll follow behind me." Wang Tong Lu's legs swayed and he said dejectedly, "Oh." A fan-shaped scene appeared outside the main gate of the imperial city. It was led by Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and General Gu Jianting. There was also the king of Yanqi, Zhao Yi, the king of Guangling, Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, Zhao Ying, the king of Huainan, and Zhao Heng, the king of Jing'an. There was also Chen Jibao, who had changed into a brand new bright red python robe. The gap behind the young man wearing the white python robe disappeared, and he was surrounded in the middle. Isolated and without help. It was the same situation as Baoyang and the 300,000 steel cavalry. Su Fengnian was expressionless. He said in his heart, "Su Xiao, this time I'll go for you." Hashtag things at the end of the month. At the beginning of the month, he wrote 1, 2, 3, 45. At the end of the month, he also finished what he had started. In June, at the beginning of the month, he said that he would guarantee 5,000 words a day and that he would rest for 4 days a month. At the end of the month, he would update around 140,000 words. Perhaps to many writers, this was a very insincere amount of updates. However, to me, this kind of promise still made me a bit nervous. At the beginning, he said that other than the guaranteed monthly votes, he could hold on to it. If he didn't give enough in the middle of the month, he wouldn't give it to me even if I begged him for votes. As a result, as of yesterday, on the 26th, he had already written close to 165,000 words. That's why he said, 6, 7, 9. If you have any free monthly votes, you can vote for him. As for the monthly votes, there's no need for that. This month, everyone worked very hard. Even if my updates exceeded expectations, in my own opinion, it was far from what you all paid for it. The matter of asking for votes is that everyone still has the remaining monthly votes. In this month's monthly votes battle, old readers came back one after another. New readers continued to stay strong. The two sides were divided, but they complemented each other. It was very exciting. I know that at the beginning, Snow wasn't a very likable work. Xuanhuan wasn't Xuanhuan, Wuxia wasn't Wuxia, it was all in one pot. However, I was very happy when I wrote Snow. I was happy that I didn't encounter any major bottlenecks. I was happy that I silently picked up my character. I was happy that many new readers joined in. I was happy that new readers occasionally didn't understand my updates. I was happy that you all argued or explained things for the sake of the story. For me, as long as my life was stable, I didn't mind earning less money and having more readers. Of course, if I could have both, that would be the best. I was lucky to have debuted in the golden age of online literature. At that time, I never thought that I would be where I am today. I was lucky to have met you all. In the 8th, Snow will start pre-selling on Dang Dang tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Toad will probably be published in October. However, compared to Snow, Toad is still a long way off. Thus, Snow became my first published simplified Chinese book. I hope that everyone can support it within their abilities. I also sincerely hope that Snow will be a physical book that can maintain its value and increase in value. I always felt that the book in Snow would be better if it was read slowly on paper. I reckon that one of my hardcore readers at the publishing house, the beautiful girl who planned the publication of Snow, was completely speechless by my laziness. I think her here. It was because of her stubbornness that everyone was able to see the physical book in Snow so quickly. In the 9th, next month, which is September, we will still fight for first place in the monthly votes. However, as Xiao Yi, who I have known for many years, said, we are all persevering. That is enough. I suddenly remembered a sentence from Li Yufu. I see Zhenwu sees me. I work hard to write the book, you quietly read the book. Chapter 722. Auspicious Opening. Forbidden Purple. Su Fengnian finally saw the main hall in front of him. It had a yellow roof and red walls. The two wings of yellow glazed roof gradually fell. The main hall was built on a white simmer base. On the left and right of the central axis of his feet were the seawall tiles. Su Fengnian knew a little about geomancy. He knew that the central axis behind him was not only 16 miles of imperial road, but also a long earth axis that extended to the south of the empire. Mount Fengshan, the mountains in Huaizhong, and the many mountain ranges in Jiangnan formed 3 majestic mountains. The emperor of the Zhao family in the capital was sitting on the dragon throne in the main hall, listening to the world from the south. The head of the civil officials, Zhang Julu, walked to the right. The head of the military, Gu Jiantang, walked to the left. The 5 kings of the imperial family all walked slowly around Zhang Julu. Only Chen Zhibao and Gu Jiantang walked side by side. Su Fengnian, as the son of a king, should not be in front. But no one raised an objection. The imperial censor shut up and the eunuchs kept quiet. Among the 5 kings, the king of Jing and Zhao Sun walked behind Zhao Ying, the duke of Huainan. Zhao Sui, the duke of Jiaodong, intentionally or unintentionally, fell behind his nephew, Zhao Sun. He walked in front of Su Fengnian, but did not say anything. It was like a crumbling old wall, sheltering the young man from the wind and rain for the last time. Su Fengnian kept his gaze down and silently counted his steps. When the glorious dragon wall appeared in his vision, he was about to start climbing up the steps. When he stepped on the white jade steps, he gently turned his head back to look. There were a lot of people moving around, and the sound of jade hitting jade could be heard. His figure slightly stagnated. The old civil official behind him, who once carried the coffin and remonstrated with the king of Bailiang, subconsciously retracted his foot and snorted heavily. Obviously, he was dissatisfied with the young prince's ignorance. Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and did not care about the elder's demonstration. He turned around and climbed step by step into the main hall. There was a dragon throne in the main hall. In front of the hall was the Pill Emperor. There were copper tortoises, copper cranes, and sundials. There were 18 cauldrons on the upper and lower terrace. When the powerful officials who had the qualifications to enter the main hall stood in place, the Son of Heaven, dressed in a yellow dragon robe, finally appeared. The several princes also quietly entered the hall. According to past practice, when the eunuch announced the start of the morning court ceremony, the hundreds of officials inside and outside the main hall had to kneel and kowtow to the emperor. However, this court assembly was clearly different from the past. Not only was Han Diaoxi replaced by Song Tonglu, the emperor was also not in a hurry to take a seat. The solemn-faced head of the imperial palace, Song Tonglu, said in a clear voice, "In today's morning court assembly, Minister Zhang Julu does not need to kneel." The purple-bearded, blue-eyed Grand Secretary Zhang did not move at all. He was originally standing at the front of the right-hand side. The several princes standing side by side also had their eyes lowered. Naturally, no one could see the expression of this current court's Grand Secretary. Ever since Li Yang pacified the central plains of spring and autumn, the number of officials who received special merit could be counted on one's fingers. Counting on one's fingers, there were only 3 people. The old Grand Secretary, Zhang Julu's respected teacher, did not need to kneel to the Son of Heaven in the court assembly. After West Chu's Grand Preceptor entered the capital and assumed the post of the left servant of the province, he was granted the right to sit in the Pill Emperor's yellow rosewood imperial tutor chair. Only, the elder had never sat down even once. Then there was the king of Bailiang, who used to be a pillar of state, who did not kneel in front of the emperor, who did not kneel in front of the emperor, who did not kneel in front of the emperor. Of the 3, only the civil and military official Su Shao, who relied on his military achievements, was the most impolite, so he naturally attracted criticism. Great General Gu Jiantang does not need to kneel. Song Tonglu's deep and resounding voice that didn't seem like a eunuch's continued to pass down. The first person on the left in the main hall, the Minister of War Gu Jiantang, lowered his head slightly as a way of expressing his gratitude. Everyone in Liyang criticized Su Shao for being disrespectful in everything. Most of them also felt sorry that this great general, who was also an important official with meritorious service during the spring and autumn period, could not fulfill his ambitions and was trapped in the post of Minister of War for 18 years. Only in recent years did he rush to the northern border. Everyone in the court felt that the Son of Heaven was wise. With Gu Jiantang guarding the northern gate of the capital, Liyang could naturally rest easy without worry. However, nowadays, there were constantly rumors coming out of the capital's prestigious mansions that Great General Gu was about to step down from his post as Minister of War. This made many people start to mutter again, hoping that Minister Gu's military power would not be taken away as well. Now that the military town at the northern border had just improved slightly, could it be that they were going to burn the bridge after crossing the river? That would be killing the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. War Saint Chen Zhibao does not need to kneel. In the future, during the court assembly, Chen Zhibao may enter the hall in civilian clothes and with a sword at his side. Chen Zhibao's face was expressionless. However, the pillars of the court all sucked in a breath of cold air. Some of the younger officials, perhaps because they had heard the older generation talk about how the current emperor regarded and respected the little butcher, most of them did not think much of it. Today they had thoroughly experienced it. Chen Zhibao currently did not have the title of king or an official position. Fine, then he would directly confer the title of war saint in front of the court officials. These two words carried even more weight than not kneeling in front of the emperor. It was clear that Chen Zhibao's position in Liyang, which unified the spring and autumn period, was almost equivalent to one of the spring and autumn period's 13 armors, Yi Bai Kuei, to West Chu. Previously, when the 5 kings entered the capital, the emperor did not give them any special treatment. Only when a white horse in white clothes and plum wine from West Shu entered the capital, the emperor personally came out of the palace to welcome them. Now, he even wore civilian clothes and had a sword at his side to attend the court assembly, becoming the 4th person after Su Zhao's old Grand Secretary Sun Shiji. Chen Zhibao's special honor could be said to be at the peak of perfection. Yan Qi King Zhaobing does not need to kneel. The king of Yan lowered his head and said softly, "Thank you for your grace." The Imperial College's left chancellor, Huan Wen, does not kneel. The wizened old man, Huan Wen, gave a carefree smile and calmly accepted it. Huan Wen was an anomaly in the Liyang Imperial Court. He was famous for not fighting. Not fighting once was nothing, but Huan Wen had not fought for more than half his life. Back then, among the old Grand Secretary's favorite students, Huan Wen's poetic talent was publicly acknowledged to be above Zhang Julu's. Before the old Grand Secretary passed away, Ku Enyan alone entered the Hanlin Academy as the Yellow Gatekeeper. It was said that it was Huan Wen who gave the position to Bai Yan while he sneaked out of the capital and became a small foreign official, slowly climbing up the ranks without arrogance or impetuousness. Afterwards, when he returned to the capital to resume his post, the emperor originally intended for him to enter either the Ministry of Personnel or the Ministry of Rights. However, at that time, those 2 third-rank high positions just happened to be his close old friends. As a result, Huan Wen ran off to the Imperial College to serve as the chancellor. Behind closed doors, he wholeheartedly studied knowledge. When it came to the Imperial Court's important officials, their reputation was high and they could be mentioned on equal terms with Huan Wen. However, in their later years, this old man Song's son and the current Minister of Rights, Lu Daolin, were just a few people. Xiongzhou's Yao Baifeng does not kneel. Chapter 7:23. A scholarly old man at the back bowed slightly in return, neither servile nor overbearing. Yao Baifeng had always been a free and unfettered scholar in the Liang dynasty. He himself was a first-rate Confucian scholar, one of the 5 heroes of the Yao school. His reputation was no less than the 3 heroes of the Song school. He even used his home school to contend with the private school of Qianglong of the Yinxue Palace. When Zhang Julu was young, he had asked Master Yao many times. When Bai Yan turned 20, he carried his books and traveled to study. The first place he went was the Wenji building of the Yao family in Xiongzhou. Yao Baifeng devoted his life to transforming the essence of Confucianism into national studies. He had students all over the world. Yao Baifeng's trip to the capital to meet the emperor would not have been so quiet if it were not for the fact that the 5 kings had gathered and Chen Zhibao had come alone, which was too eye-catching. The crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, will not kneel. When head eunuch Song Tonglu said this, the hall was finally in an uproar. Most of the officials standing side by side looked at each other. But the next sentence was even more shocking. He can enter the palace with a Bailiang sword, and he can enter and leave the palace at will in casual clothes. Countless officials sighed in their hearts. The court was building momentum for this little bastard to succeed the king of Bailiang in the future. What a Bailiang! Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, Zhao Bing, Huan Wen, and Yao Baifeng didn't kneel in today's court assembly. In the future, they probably wouldn't receive this treatment. Chen Zhibao and Su Fengnian, who were also from Bailiang, didn't kneel in the future. One could already enter the palace with a sword, while the other could enter the palace with a sword. This meant that as long as the 2 didn't commit any major crimes, this honor would continue to be passed down. Every time they participated in a court assembly, they would have more indescribable glory. As for Chen Zhibao, who was personally praised by the emperor as the white-clothed war immortal, the officials in the hall were already mentally prepared. As for Yao Baifeng, he was a renowned scholar. It was reasonable that he didn't kneel even once. But this Baiyang heir, Su Fengnian, what virtue and ability did he have? Some officials who hated Baiyang and feared the butchers glanced sideways at the young man whose hair was as white as an old man's. They all silently cursed in their hearts. Since his hair was already white, he might as well die. Baiyang's white-haired people sending off their own white-haired people. That was truly a joyous occasion for the entire country to celebrate. 7 people who didn't kneel, there was no one else who didn't kneel. After the head eunuch spoke, the thousands of people inside and outside the hall slowly knelt down. Like a tide, they quickly rushed from south to north. Not to mention the officials in the square who couldn't see the emperor's dragon face. After the 300 officials kneeled on the wide steps in the hall, they could only see the emperor's feet on the dragon throne. Among the 7 people who didn't kneel, most of them, including Yao Baifeng and the others, had their heads bowed. The old man, Huan Wen, looked left and right. In the eyes of this old man, who was jokingly called Tantanan, Chen Jibao, who was no longer wearing white, was handsome and dignified. He was truly a strange man who would stand out wherever he went. Huan Wen had a good impression of this young man who had enjoyed wealth early on. In his heart, he had long placed him in the first line with the Minister of War, Gu Jianteng. Then Huan Wen saw the man in white in front of him, who was even younger than Chen Jibao. Of course, there was a world of difference between the two. When the white-clothed war sage entered the city with plum wine, thousands of people turned out to greet him. The emperor himself came. The difference between the white-clothed war sage and the white-haired emperor standing in front of him was like heaven and earth. It was said that even the officials of the Ministry of Rites wanted to see him, which made the Ministry of Rites very angry. If it weren't for the fact that the minister Lu Daolin was related to the Su family by marriage, they would have already cursed him in the office. Huan Wen almost couldn't hold back his laughter. He didn't know whether this kid was stupid or calm. Right now he was looking up at the Xian Yuan mirror hanging in the middle of the main hall. Huan Wen followed his gaze and looked up. Huan Wen was a learned man who knew everything in the literary world. Not only did he know that the place where Su Fengnian was looking at was a peachwood talisman, he even knew the Fu characters on both sides of the talisman. The Liang dynasty originally emphasized both Taoism and Buddhism. Taoism came first and Buddhism came second. Therefore, the hall-suppressing peach talisman was a combination of Buddhism and Taoism. On the front side was the Taoism, 3 pure secret arts suppressing country suppressing talisman, and the Tai Chi talisman. On the back side was the Dharma suppressing 8 characters mantra heart sutra written by a Buddha of the 2 Zen temples, as well as the 8 treasures umbrella cover mantra and Guanyin mantra. However, in Huan Wen's opinion, since the Buddha annihilation had begun, the hall-suppressing talisman should be replaced with a new one like the memorial archway. Huan Wen stared at the back of the young man in a daze, pondering over some unknown meaning. Yang Taisui, the sickly tiger, felt guilty about the white clothes case in the capital. Over the years, his state deteriorated day by day. He couldn't stop Prime Minister Qingxi Zhao Danping from gaining power day by day. He only hoped that he could quietly establish a cornerstone in the Buddha annihilation torrent that couldn't be stopped by a mantis trying to stop a chariot. However, man proposes, God disposes, and he died outside Jiang'e. With his death, the holy monk of the dragon tree passed away in Beimang, and Li Dongxin was unwilling to leave the 2 Zen temples. Buddhism was doomed to be bleak. Huan Wen was one of the few scholars who bluntly advocated the unification of the 3 religions. Unfortunately, on this matter, Old Man Huan also knew Green Eye's difficulties, so he didn't want to add more trouble to the Grand Secretary. The Emperor interrupted Huan Wen's thoughts with a shout, "Rise, all my beloved officials." Huan Wen collected some of his emotions and began to close his eyes to rest and nap. The old man had already known about the shocking news from the morning court, so there was no need to talk about expectations. Although he was also involved, Huan Wen had long been accustomed to the mandate of heaven, so he didn't find it strange. Today, no one dared to be tactless and talk too much. They could only listen attentively. Imperial edicts were issued one after another. Looking at the expressions of the civil and military officials, one could tell that there would soon be an aggressive shaking of the court and the common people. Promote the left chancellor of the Imperial College, Huan Wen, to the left push of the province and be conferred the title of Grand Secretary of the Wenting. Promote Yao Baifeng to the left chancellor of the Imperial College. Promote Jin Lanting to the right chancellor of the Imperial College. Gu Jiantang will be relieved of his post as Minister of War and be conferred the title of Great Pillar State, in charge of the military and politics of the northern region. Promote Lu Xingxiang to the Assistant Minister of War. Confer Yan Jieshi to the Grand Secretary of the Dongyuan Pavilion. The last imperial edict was, Chen Jibao is in charge of the Minister of War. In the future, if there is an external post, he can also lead the Ministry of War. At this point, Chen Jibao turned his head and looked to the right. It just so happened that someone was looking to the left. On the dragon throne, the emperor had a playful look in his eyes. Chapter 724. The court session was dismissed with a light sentence. Nothing happened in the hall, but the entire dynasty was in a storm. Any single promotion today would be enough to make the capital talk about it for months to half a year. But once it happened, it was easy to make people dumbfounded. Hundreds of court officials stood up and slowly walked out of the hall. Most of the old people went to congratulate Huan Wen, grandfather Huan, who had been transferred to become the left servant of the province. Regarding Tantanon's promotion, it could be said that they were happy to hear about it. No one was jealous or jealous. Some of the younger and more popular court officials flocked to Jin Lanting, calling him brother. It was very lively. They originally thought that Jin Lanting would polish his position as the emperor's personal attendant for a few more years before returning to take up an important position. They never thought that he would leap to become the right chancellor of the Imperial College left behind by Song's second master. This was a dignified secondary third rank in his early 30s. He had even become the leader of tens of thousands of imperial students, becoming famous in one fell swoop. Everyone knew that Jin Lanting, this outsider, was destined to be irresistible in the officialdom. They couldn't help but wonder if he really was the next template of Grand Secretary Zhang. After Jin Lanting returned the greeting to everyone, he quickened his pace and walked toward Grandfather Huan and the new left chancellor, the head of the Yao family. He respectfully bowed with his hands folded in front. The two elders smiled as they helped this young man, who could no longer be described as a new noble. The three of them entered and left the Imperial College. They were originally of the same origin, so their relationship was imperceptibly closer. Moreover, Jin Lanting had long been half of Yao Baifeng's student. Leaving the hall, they formed a circle. These three were the core, and the other was Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang and Chen Jibao. Unexpectedly, no one dared to go up and greet them. Then there were the Lu brothers, Lu Daolin, Lu Baijie, and Lu Xingxiang. In the future, the Ministry of War would form an interesting scene of two Lu assistant ministers. The vassal kings all dispersed, occasionally chatting with the officials of the capital, but it was all superficial, neither painful nor itchy. After Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, found the crown prince Zhao Yi, he looked back at the white-haired man who was walking alone. He did not say anything to him. But when the king of Bailiang, whose power was getting weaker and weaker in the Liao kingdom, cast a glance at him, the crown prince of Bailiang cupped his hands and bowed his head. Zhao Sui didn't change his expression. He turned around and walked forward. On the other hand, Zhao Yi, who was also a vassal prince but was unknown, was a little stunned. Hearing his father's light cough, he quickly followed. Su Fengyan left in peace and quiet. He glanced at Jin Lanting, who was surrounded by people in front of him. The little county magistrate who had been scared to death by him in the past was now flushed with success. His speed of promotion was almost comparable to that of Zaifu Zhangjulu. Su Fengyan did not have a good impression of this guy who was good at taking advantage of others. He was afraid that if you wanted to go down in the future, you would not be able to. You could only fall down directly. In addition to Jin Lanting, there was also Yan Jieshi, who had become a relative of the royal family after betraying Bailiang. He married a daughter and got the status of a relative of the royal family and a real grand secretary of the palace pavilion. This was a big deal. This old man made up for the Dongyuan pavilion, one of the grand secretaries of the 3 palaces and 3 pavilions. After Huan Wen was made the grand secretary of the palace pavilion, which was the head of the 3 pavilions, only the Wuyin Palace, which was left for Zhang Julu after his death, was still empty. Moreover, Yao Baifeng, whose family roots were close to Bailiang, was pulled into the capital and enjoyed a high position. As a result, the civil officials of Bailiang were likely to be restless. Su Fengnian originally wanted to return to Bailiang and pass by the Yao family to see if he could persuade the children of the Yao family to enter Bailiang, which urgently needed a large number of middle-level civil officials. In the past, the Yao family only flirted with Bailiang but did not sleep with them. Now that they had openly entered the bed of the Emperor Zhao family, Su Fengnian saved himself a lot of trouble. Unknowingly, Su Fengnian fell behind everyone. After crossing the threshold of the main hall, he stood at the top of the stairs and stopped. He saw Yan Qiji, who was newly appointed as the Yellow Gatekeeper, by his father's side. He wanted to walk back a few times, but was pulled back by Yan Jieshi. Su Fengnian smiled. It was fortunate that he had the support of his sister, who was about to become the crown princess. Otherwise, with this kid's cowardice and kindness, he would have been eaten by the nobles in the capital long ago. Su Fengnian looked up and did not see Kong Wuqi, whom he had not seen in many years. Presumably, his official rank was still not high enough and did not have the qualifications to participate in the court assembly. Su Fengnian placed one hand on the dragon-carved railing. He knew that the reason the 7 people did not kneel in the court was mostly because of him. More accurately, the emperor had given Su Shao a great deal of face. However, after giving him the sweet date, he was served with a few sturdy sticks. He had poached the corner of the Yao family into the capital and promoted Jean Lanting to disgust the Bailiang. As for Chen Zhibao temporarily taking charge of the Ministry of War, it would not affect his appointment as the Prince of Shu. It was only because the emperor of the Zhao family favored this person too much that this was the icing on the cake. This kind of behavior was like a man going through untold hardships to chase after a woman he had admired for a long time. He wanted nothing more than to use rouge, powder, gold hairpins, and magnificent clothes on her to show his sincerity. Furthermore, the court could not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Having Chen Zhibao take charge of the ironclad Ministry of War could not only convince the masses and suppress the rebellious officials of the Ministry of War, it could also give the court a way out for Gu Jiantang. Otherwise, even if Gu Jiantang was the only pillar of the country in the current dynasty, if he handed over such a high position as the Minister of War and no one took over the hot potato, it would be too much of a slap to Gu Jiantang's face. Since the beginning of history, matters in the temple had to be closely linked. Su Fengnian pressed down on the Bailiang knife at his waist and said to himself with a smile, "Master, no wonder you said there are 2 magic weapons in the temple, a knife and a sword. The knife that hides a knife in the sleeve and the sword that hides a knife in the belly." Chapter 725. Su Fengnian walked down the steps and turned back to look at the eaves of the main hall. Back then, 3 people had been drinking and singing on the roof. There were a few eunuchs walking back and forth in the square, sweeping the ground and picking up the lost jade pendants of a few careless officials. When they saw the man in the white robe walking out of the imperial city gate, they were all a little afraid. No matter how bad his reputation was, he was still a lord who carried a knife to the morning court. He was not someone they could provoke or make fun of. Moreover, even a fool knew that after Chen Zhibao left Bailiang, there was no doubt who would become the king of Bailiang. After Su Fengnian walked out of the gate, he saw the bright red robe that was obviously waiting for him. Many officials deliberately stopped at a distance, waiting to see a good show. Chen Zhibao had gone to Shu alone and then entered the capital alone. Everyone would only feel that no matter how much power this new Minister of War had, it was not rude at all. Even the butcher and 300,000 cavalrymen couldn't help Su Fengnian. Everyone thought that if this guy could become the emperor's son-in-law as soon as possible, everything would be over. After Su Fengnian came closer, the 2 walked side by side under the wall. Su Fengnian laughed softly and asked, "Last time when you went to Shu, I didn't have time to see you off. You don't blame me, do you?" Chen Zhibao said gently, "It's okay. When you become the king of Bailiang, I may not be able to attend the ceremony. We don't owe each other anything." Su Fengnian laughed it off. Chen Zhibao was no longer wearing white robes. The white-haired man beside him was wearing a white robe. It was hard to predict the future. After leaving Bailiang, Chen Zhibao, who turned into a dragon in the wind and rain, said indifferently, "If you do well, Bailiang's crown prince, are you confident that you can be the king of Bailiang?" Su Fengnian asked, "If I can't do it, are you going to do it?" Chen Zhibao turned to look at the heir of Bailiang, whom he hadn't interacted much with. He smiled and said, "Your temperament is indeed like that of a general." Su Fengnian went straight to the point and asked, "How many years did you serve as the Minister of War before you went to Shu to be conferred the title of king? When the time comes, will you still lead the Ministry of War?" Although they were mortal enemies, Chen Zhibao was very open and candid. He calmly said, "First, you'll be conferred the title of king, but you won't just be a vassal for a year or two. Then, you'll be conferred the title of king, and you'll have to violate the rules and lead the Ministry of War for a year or two. Therefore, you still have a few years to accumulate your strength. However, by the time I run out of patience, Beimang will be marching south on a large scale. At that time, you will be attacked from both front and rear. If you still can't conquer the western regions, then you will have to wait for the resources that the Supreme General has accumulated to be exhausted. However, I can tell you clearly that as long as we fail to defend our business, the Su family will have no choice but to flee to the western regions. At that time, I will definitely be the first to kill you. If you die in the plum wine, at least you will live up to your status. It will be better than being assassinated by the imperial court." Su Fengnian slid his hand across the city wall and didn't say anything. The heir of Bailiang, who was known to be glib-tongued, was a man of few words. Instead, it was the usually serious Chen Zhibao who spoke more. "I've waited for so many years, but you didn't die in an unexpected disaster. I don't mind waiting a few more years for you to die in the struggle between the two dynasties. Bailiang's 300,000 cavalrymen belong to my adoptive father. As his former adoptive son, I don't dare to fight for them. However, you are someone who hasn't even experienced the spring and autumn war. It's not that you are good at hiding your strength and biding your time, and it's not that you can easily obtain them just by hiding your strength and biding your time. There are many things under the heavens that are right and proper. Unfortunately, this is not one of them." Su Fengnian touched the cool wall with his fingers and said calmly, "I'll wait for you." Chen Zhibao smiled gently and turned to leave. There was no cursing or fighting. This greatly disappointed the spectating officials. They all hurriedly dispersed to avoid falling into the eyes of the new Minister of War and bearing a grudge. Su Fengnian continued to walk along the base of the wall. Then he met the disguised Princess Sui Zhu. She was waiting for him. Then, without any surprise, she said mockingly, "It's scary to compare goods. When the two of you stand together, the difference is like the difference between the clouds and the mud. Even I feel embarrassed for you." Su Fengnian said bluntly, "You really can't change a dog's habit of eating shit." Princess Sui Zhu flew into a rage. "Surnamed Su, I dare you to say that again." Su Fengnian suddenly pointed at the top of the wall. "Look, there's another sparrow." Princess Sui Zhu walked over and was kicked by Su Fengnian. In the end, she was the one who was hurt. On the way back to the palace after leaving Maui Post House, Zhang Huan, a member of the imperial family of the fallen Dongyue, said that the heir of Bailiang was good at martial arts. However, Zhao Fengya, who was stubborn, was unwilling to believe it. Su Fengnian boldly reached out and pinched her delicate nose, covering the dots of freckles. He joked, "You finally look better now." Zhao Fengya bared her fangs and brandished her claws. After Su Fengnian let go, he said recklessly, "Don't try to seduce me again and again. I can't marry you. Do you want to marry into Bailiang and become a princess?" Zhao Fengya spat and said aggressively, "Look in the mirror and see what you're like." Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Be careful that you don't marry Chen Zhibao." Princess Sui Zhu was stunned for a moment. Then, her limpid eyes overflowed with unconcealable fear and panic. Su Fengnian turned and walked away, saying, "I was just saying. But I always jinx it." Zhao Fengya caught up and punched Su Fengnian hard in the back. Su Fengnian did not respond and turned to the carriage. Princess Sui Zhu gritted her teeth and said, Do you know that there is a 6-character prophecy in the Imperial Astronomer? Rats eat food. Shu eats cold. Su Fengnian turned his head and said with a smile, "Then why don't you hurry up and become the Princess of Shu?" Zhao Fengya sneered and said, "Can you really let this happen? Once Chen Zhibao becomes a relative of the imperial family, even if you become the king of Bailiang, will you have a good day?" Su Fengnian blinked and turned back to whisper in her ear, "Su Shao also asked me to pass a message to you. If you are really forced to be sent to Shishu, tell him." Princess Sui Zhu did not fight back for the first time. She blinked and whispered, "You're not lying to me?" Su Fengnian said seriously, "Of course I'm lying to you." Zhao Fengya almost fainted from anger and shouted that she would beat him to death. Her elegant and luxurious white embroidered robe was stained with dust from countless footprints. She leaned against the wall and could only watch the bastard walk away. She cursed, "Rats eat food, eat you up. The king of Shu will kill Prince Liang and kill you." Unexpectedly, the bastard had not gone far before he turned around and opened his mouth, saying 3 words silently. "It's true." Zhao Fengya found that she had never felt so disgusted with the enemy in front of her. She told herself that she pitied him because his hair turned white at such a young age. And after his hair turned white, he did not look ugly. Instead, he looked even better. Zhao Fengya wrinkled her nose and squatted along the wall in a daze. She wanted to cry and laugh. Chapter 726. If you want everyone in the world to know you, it's simple: impeach the butcher. If you want to become famous in the capital overnight, it's simple: scold the king of Bailiang. Jean Lanting, who had risen to the center of the imperial court, was undoubtedly the best example. There were 2 memorial arches outside the imperial city. After the court session ended, the military officials entered the Zhenwu Memorial Arches, while the civil officials entered the Zhenwu Memorial Arches in an orderly manner. They each went to the yamen to deal with the affairs of the imperial court, but they soon returned. Other than a few big shots in the capital who sat calmly on the fishing platform, ignoring the disturbance on the central axis of the imperial road, even a large number of disciples turned their horses around because there was a big show to watch. The Imperial College's students first blocked the path of the white-haired man with a sword, then 100 people, 1,000 people, surging like carps crossing the river. Jean Lanting, who would enter the Imperial College the next day, was as steady as a rock. He sat quietly in a carriage by the roadside, watching with folded arms. Huan Wen, who had already removed his position as the left chancellor, stood by the roadside with a smile. He didn't purposely block the scholar's desire, only saying a few words that were similar to the elder's nagging that a gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. The Imperial College's buildings were endless, and its scale was second to none between the imperial city and the inner city. Even the yamen of the 6 departments couldn't compete with it. In the past, once the imperial students were agitated, it would become an extremely troublesome matter for the imperial court. They were the court's own children, so it was useless to scold them. Among the imperial students, there were many scholars who were well-read and eloquent, so it was even more difficult to scold them. The Imperial College had already vaguely surpassed the scholars' group of Gangnam-do, becoming the place of fish and dragons that produced the largest number of court officials in Liang. Not to mention the capital, even the entire Liang Imperial Court had never seen such an interesting confrontation. Thousands of Imperial College students gathered on the Royal Road. They were all the future pillars of the country. If nothing unexpected happened, the outstanding ones among them would become the mainstays of Liang. Moreover, the number of people didn't decrease but increased instead. The formation was getting stronger and stronger, occupying all the angels. Naturally, their momentum was like a rainbow. In the Imperial College, there were many heavenly strategy chancellors who couldn't persuade these proud students who came from rich and poor families. What's more, they couldn't be said to have spared no effort in persuading them. Most of them were still happy to see them succeed. It was only because of their duty to supervise, impart knowledge and preach Tao that they lazily mentioned it. A few chancellors who didn't care about trifles and liked to mingle with the students of the Imperial College even joked that they would go to a certain street in the capital to buy some food to satisfy their cravings when they were free. The inaction of the officials of the Imperial College imperceptibly boosted the arrogance of the students of the Imperial College. Such a huge burst of scholarly spirit shook the imperial court and the common people. When some of the old adherents of West Chu who lived next to the Zhao family heard about it, they couldn't help but feel sad and happy at the same time. They couldn't help lamenting that the righteousness of the spring and autumn period was transferred to the Zhao family. It was only right for them to leave the sun and take over the world. One side had a lot of power and influence, while the other side appeared more and more lonely and pitiful. The heir of Bailiang, Su Fengyan, stood on the axis of the world. He took down the Bailiang saber he received from Su Shao. The saber didn't leave its scabbard. Instead, he placed both hands on the hilt of the saber and stood there leaning on the saber. He had once guarded Dunhuang alone with a sword. Today, he stood alone with a saber on the imperial road, blocking 10,000 people alone. Almost half of the Imperial College flooded into the Imperial Road and piled up densely. They originally thought that after this hedonistic son of rich parents saw their magnificent momentum, he would be scared witless and run away like a rat. Who would have thought that he would really be beaten until his face was swollen and stubbornly endure it? It was just as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any leeway to show off. They heard from the chancellors of the Imperial College, who had returned from the Imperial Court, that this son of rich parents actually carried a saber to court. This was simply absurd. They couldn't afford to offend the second emperor, Lame Su. They couldn't afford to offend Shen Jibao, who had won the public support after leaving Liang and entering Shu. How could they not dare to teach this unscrupulous son of rich parents a lesson? Even if they didn't drown him with saliva today, they would still make him leave behind that infamous Bailiang saber that killed people like flies. A Confucian scholar took a step forward and angrily asked, "I heard that Bailiang released news that you killed the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, at the Ruoshui River and killed the 5th raccoon of the Bubeng Mountain in the Ruren Mountains. Do you dare to swear to the heavens that these rumors are true?" Su Fengyan didn't say anything. The Confucian scholar took 3 steps forward to beat a drowning dog. He pressed on, "Don't talk about killing 2 people. When did you, Su Fengyan, go to Beimang? Can you tell us?" Chapter 727. This was the first time most people had seen the Northern Liang heir in person. If not for the fact that they knew of Ren Tu's identity as the eldest son of the first wife, and that countless Northern Liang scholars had gone to the capital to complain about this person's absurd behavior, they would probably be jealous of him if they met him on the road. Or perhaps they would secretly praise him as a romantic and handsome guy. His appearance was truly unruly, especially when he wore the 5-clawed, 9-serpent patchwork clothes of a vassal prince bestowed upon him by the emperor. He truly looked outstanding. However, this person's misdeeds were too numerous to be recorded. When the previous emperor passed away, Mount Qingliang was brightly lit with singing and dancing. The whole city knew about it. Last time when he traveled to Jiangnan, he used a horse to drag a talented scholar to death. He also ordered his retainers to kill on Guangling Road, and blood flowed like a river. After he turned 20, he didn't show any restraint. He didn't have the slightest bit of gentleness, respect, and frugality. It was only said that every day in the Wutangan Bailiang Palace, there were chaste women who committed suicide by jumping into wells. It was only said that in recent years, before the hereditary succession, he had already begun to sell official positions and titles. He sold them according to the weight of the official's hat, and then took them to the brothel to buy music. How could this kind of scholar have the right to carry a sword to the palace? With the jackals and wolves in the way, where were the scholars in the world? The Confucian scholar, who had always been known as an invincible contestant in the Imperial College, didn't show the slightest bit of fear because of the white-haired man's bravado. He only thought it was funny. This was the capital under the emperor's feet. How could it allow an empty-bellied foreigner to come here and show off his power? The Confucian scholar took 3 heavy steps forward again. His scholarly demeanor that didn't fear power was admirable. The ever-thickening formation behind him also took 3 steps forward. The sound was dull. Those martial artists who only knew how to fight for power in the spring and autumn periods sank the land of Shenzhou. We scholars will pull back the land of Shenzhou and raise the 5 mountains. The Confucian scholar only felt that the righteousness in his chest was about to shoot up to the sky. He raised his arm and pointed at the silent man in white. He said sternly, "The emperor of Great Qin sat on the peak of the world's power, but he was still controlled by ordinary people. How can I, Liang, follow in his footsteps? The imperial court respects you, Bailiang, everywhere. When has Bailiang ever respected the imperial court? The heavenly calamity is a vile character, allowing him to succeed." Bailiang's saber quietly sank an inch into the ground. Su Fengnian smiled indifferently and said, "A gentleman should not be so harsh." His voice wasn't loud, but it was heard clearly by Imperial Dao. A few knowledgeable people immediately looked at him in a new light. The Confucian scholar sneered, "The word, gentleman, coming out of your mouth is the biggest joke in the world. Su Fengnian, since you're unwilling to answer my 2 questions, I'll ask you again. Do you want to know the crimes you've committed in Bailiang over the years?" As expected, the nearly 10,000 students of the Imperial College saw that this fellow was speechless. They didn't dare to say anything, let alone have the courage to refute. Jean Lanting lifted the carriage's curtain, the corners of his lips curling into a cold smile. 30 years in the East, 30 years in the West. Even you, Su Fengnian, have a day like this. Back then in Bailiang, you made me suffer such humiliation, so you deserve to be despised by tens of thousands of people. When I enter the Imperial College, I'm going to make you, Su Fengnian, and Su Shao, father and son, have their names tarnished in the history books, going down in infamy for thousands of years. In the future, when I, third young Master Jean, also have students all over the court like Grand Secretary Zhang, when I go write history books, I'll definitely make you 2 into traitors." Old Master Huanwen wasn't tall, so he could only pick up a stone stool to stand on and stretch his neck to look over. No one would think that this old man was rejoicing in other people's misfortune. They only felt that Chancellor Huan was just as witty and wise as before. Even the students of the Imperial College who had just entered the Imperial College looked down on that Bailiang heir, feeling that they were a cut above him. Why would Tantanan and Huanwen need to be concerned? However, looking at old Master Huan's smiling face, outsiders didn't know what this old man, who had been in the officialdom for a long time, was truly thinking. Bailiang's blade had already sunk 3 Siyuan into the ground. Su Fengnian's hands were only holding the blade's hilt. The Confucian scholar seemed to have received help from the heavens. Even though he was still a scholar without the status of an official, his aura was astonishing. He continued forward until he was less than 100 steps away from that Bailiang heir. Just as he was about to speak again about the teachings of the saints and the words of morality, he didn't expect that the white-haired heir, who was pretending to be deaf and mute, would actually take the initiative to speak up. "I'm afraid the nail won't go deep, I'm afraid the nail won't come out." Most of the students of the Imperial College were smart people who were good at speaking tactfully. As soon as they heard this, they knew that he was mocking the imperial court for getting rid of Bailiang after it had outlived its usefulness. Su Fengnian continued calmly, "I only know that during the spring and autumn period, more than 300,000 soldiers under Su Zhao's command died on the battlefield. During the Jia period, more than 100,000 soldiers died on the battlefield. In the following 10 years, more than 80,000 soldiers died on the battlefield. It's fine if you scold me, Su Fengnian, for having no talent, no virtue, no morals, and no ambition. But have you ever remembered where the bones of these 500,000 people were buried? There are tens of thousands of scholars in the Imperial College, all year round. They sing praises of peace and prosperity. Have you ever written a eulogy for 500,000 people?" The Confucian scholar's face flushed red. He angrily said, 500,000 people sacrificed their lives for the country. They died a worthy death. What does that have to do with you, Su Fengnian? Su Fengnian calmly said, "I will guard the northwest for the Central Plains. Outside of Bailiang's 3 prefectures, I will not suffer the calamity of Bailiang's million-strong iron cavalry." The Confucian scholar was about to criticize him when Su Fengnian had already lightly pulled out Bailiang's blade, borrowing the anger of 10,000 people to nurture the intent of one blade. In an instant, the imperial path tore through 200 zhang. In the middle of the imperial path, People and horses were thrown off their feet. It was very lively. Many Imperial College students climbed out of the gully with difficulty, cursing and swearing loudly. Su Fengnian hung his cold blade and slowly advanced along the edge of the gully that had been cleaved open with one strike of his blade. Passing by the trembling Confucian scholar, Su Fengnian did not look sideways. He only smiled gently and said, "Whether or not I killed the fifth raccoon, you can ask yourself when you're dead." The Confucian scholar's lips turned purple as he sat down on the ground. Inside the carriage, Jean Lanting seemed to see the Crown Prince of Bailiang glancing at him coldly. He was so scared that his wrist trembled and he threw down the curtain. The right chancellor of the Imperial College's face was pale. He put on a strong front and said, "Su Fengnian, the achievements that I, Jean Lanting, have today have nothing to do with you. Don't think that you can be so arrogant because of your strength." Huan Wen, who was standing on the stone stool, rubbed his cheeks and muttered to himself, "Although there are 10,000 people, I will still go forward. It's not that a Confucian scholar has surpassed a Confucian scholar. What a good, guarding the northwest, only guarding the country's gate for the people." Passing through the 10,000 Imperial College students without any obstruction, the white-clothed, white-haired man stepped into the front of the carriage. This Crown Prince of Bailiang, who had bowed for a long time in front of the 600 Bailiang soldiers and refused to stand up, turned around to face the 10,000 people of the Imperial College in front of everyone's eyes and spat heavily. Chapter 728. Before the beginning of winter, it was already snowing heavily, covering the graceful woman of Great Peace City with a white fox fur coat. In this half a year, the capital was in an uproar. Not mentioning all kinds of rewards and promotions, the Bailiang heir dared to break the royal road. The imperial censors sent out impeachment memorials that flew like the snow in the sky, but they all sank into the ocean. Not a single one of them was approved by the imperial pen. The Taoist priests in the city all said that Su Fengnian relied on the power of the Yin monsters and would not be liked by the gods. They spoke with certainty and made the people of the city who were busy making up for their winter customs to thank the gods believe it without a doubt. Other than that, there was another grand event that shook the capital. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Liu Baijie, and the wanderer who had lost 3 battles and 3 defeats, were having a sword duel on the eagle-pressing platform. The Son of Heaven personally allowed Minister Liu to take a day off. Before the two went up the eagle-pressing platform to compete, it was the beginning of the snow. Assistant Minister Liu, dressed in scholarly attire, carried a sword and floated over. It was no wonder the saying that one sword was full of immortal energy. Some of the people in the capital who originally thought this member of the Jiangnan Liu family was not qualified to be an official of the Ministry of War were also impressed by the elegance of Liu Baijie, who had yet to use his sword. Then it was the sloppy swordsman that went up the platform. He finally changed into something that was not so sloppy and bright. This guy first defeated the female sword attendant of the Wu family sword tomb, then defeated the swordsman of the capital, Qi Jiajie, and defeated the Dongyue sword pool by Jiangshan 3 times. He already had the title of Wenbushing. Speaking of it, it was strange. This guy's appearance and bearing were not likable, especially not favored by women. But after losing 3 battles in a row, he was very popular in the lower levels of the city. When Wenbushing slowly went up the platform, there were people in the crowd who shouted loudly that Wenbushing should win at least once this time. The down-and-out swordsman surnamed Wen immediately cursed back, "Go fuck your mother." The spectators came from all walks of life. Regardless of age or age, most of the women frowned in disdain. On the other hand, the coarse men all cheered loudly, waving flags and shouting battle cries for her. This time, the Eagle Press platform was a good place to enjoy the snow and view the scenery. In addition, Liu Baijie had an illustrious official status, and there were rumors that several princes would quietly come to the Eagle Press platform in plain clothes. There were also rumors that the beautiful Li Baishe, who was both beautiful and beautiful, would personally come with great fanfare. Therefore, compared to the previous 3 times, the Eagle Press platform was a boiling cauldron of voices. However, everyone was well aware that in fact, they were all curiously anticipating the appearance of Bailiang's heir apparent who carried a saber. After the court assembly ended that day, the son of a vassal surnamed Su, only had a duel with the Imperial College. For the commoners, how could it be satisfying enough? They all thought that this time, they would cause a ruckus on the Eagle Press platform and be entangled by the son of an official in the capital. Before the duel, Su Fengnian had already walked out of the Demoyai post house and was prepared to take a carriage to the Eagle Press platform to join in the fun. However, he saw an extremely poor old Confucian squatting under the dragon claw locust tree and felt uneasy. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. After a moment of hesitation, he returned to the rear courtyard of the post house and asked Blue Bird to warm a pot of yellow wine. Su Fengnian had a photographic memory, so he remembered who the old scholar waiting outside the post house was. That year when he left Mount Huishan on the boat to the riverbank, his second sister, Su Weisheng, was bringing the dragon sand from the Earth Lung Mountain, which had been sealed off for 500 years, to Shangyin Academy. This Lu Wenbao, a remnant of the Southern Tang dynasty, received a review from Su Weisheng. When he volunteered himself, he kept mentioning Zhang Julu, Zhao Yuling, Wang Xiongui, Yuan Guo Han Lin, and other important ministers of the imperial court. He threatened to use the power of the prime minister as a starting point to analyze the important matters of the imperial court. At the time, Su Fengnian didn't like the old scholar's shocking words and refused to let him go. He didn't expect that after the old man returned to his hometown, he nimbly ran over to the capital to block him. It was obvious how much he cared about fame and fortune. When it was close to noon, Tong Ziliang and his little daughter walked into the courtyard with several large mahogany food boxes. It was almost the beginning of winter, and the popular food in the capital was stewed mutton and dumplings. In addition to these two, there was also a pot of fragrant and tender ginger duck. Su Fengnian had changed into casual clothes and was sitting under the eaves, admiring the snow. When he saw the father and daughter bring in lunch, he walked over to help the panting delicate and pretty woman take the slightly scalding food box. Ordinary people couldn't afford to use this kind of expensive food box, which was almost made of royal wood. Tong Ziliang had also borrowed it from someone else. After all, he had to be worthy of his status as the heir of Bailiang to be at ease. The graceful woman, whose appearance wasn't as rough as Tong Ziliang's, blushed as she handed over the food box. She twisted her hands behind her back, gently wiping away the burning sensation on her fingertips. Ever since His Royal Highness learned of her name, he would always make fun of her with little Nian, which made her blush with embarrassment. Blue Bird had already moved out a table and a stool under the eaves. Su Fengnian smiled and invited Tong Ziliang and Tong Ziliang to eat together. Tong Ziliang didn't dare and waved his hand to decline, but he still couldn't win against His Royal Highness' insistence. He could only go against the rules and sit on the bench with his daughter. Su Fengnian, Blue Bird, and Xinyuan Qingfeng each sat on one side of the table. When they opened the lid of the food box, it was steaming hot. Tong Ziliang picked up his chopsticks and quietly reported, "Your Highness, there's an old scholar standing guard under a tree outside the post house. Come, little Nian, I'm a guest. Your host should try it first." Su Fengnian used his chopsticks to tear open the stewed duck that was so fragrant that the ginger couldn't cover the fragrance of the meat. He picked up a piece and put it into the young woman's bowl first. He then nodded at Tong Ziliang and said, "I know who that person is. You don't have to pay attention to the post house." Chapter 729. Tong Ziliang nodded and smiled when he saw his daughter blushing and not daring to touch her chopsticks. He didn't have any ulterior motives when he brought her to this courtyard. He simply wanted her to see the general's eldest son. Strangely enough, his older brothers and sisters didn't dare or were unwilling to come after the first time they came to this courtyard. This made Tong Ziliang so angry that he smashed his bowl and chopsticks when he got home. However, his children had grown up and were no longer as obedient as their father when they were young. Since his youngest daughter wasn't afraid, Tong Ziliang couldn't be happier and was happy to have the opportunity to play matchmaker. As for his daughter's first awakening of love, Tong Ziliang was a crude person. Even though he saw it with his eyes and knew it in his heart, he didn't know how to say it out loud. He only thought that Her Highness hadn't lived here for long, and as she grew older, it was like the snow in the courtyard that melted on its own without needing to be cleaned. After eating a sumptuous lunch, Tong Ziliang stood up and left, telling his daughter to clean up the dishes slowly. Su Fengnian looked at the old scholar tree in the courtyard and quickly spread a layer of snow over it. He turned to Blue Bird and said, "Take a pouch of silver and throw it to Lu Wenbao outside the courtyard. Don't say anything." Blue Bird nodded and went back to her room to pack a small pouch of silver before quietly leaving the courtyard. Xianyuan Qingfeng looked at the leftover food on the table and asked, "The grace of a meal is more valuable than a pouch of silver. Are you trying to buy people's hearts like this? Isn't it a bit clumsy?" Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. The rich and powerful families raise their soldiers just like how a distinguished scholar trains a young maid or trains an eagle to train a horse. It's the same. You have to grind away their arrogance first, but you can't grind away their backbone as well. I can't open the door to just anyone. I have to know how much pride and backbone these fellows who work hard for glory, splendor, wealth, and status have. If Lu Wenbao threw down the silver and left in a rage, not forgetting to curse me for not knowing what's good for him before he left, then that would be his pride and backbone. This kind of pedantic scholar deserves to never be able to make a name for himself. But if he accepted the money, groveled and begged Blue Bird to see me, and boasted about how much real talent he had, I really wouldn't care. Bailiang had no need of people who wrote splendid essays and sang praises of virtue. In that barren land, a life of rigid study would not last long, and a crafty scholar would be of no use to Bailiang. Let's bet and see what kind of attitude this Lu Wenbao has. How about 100 taels of gold? When Xiao Chong, who had been listening intently, heard the price of 100 taels of gold, his jaw dropped. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered. "Sure. I bet this rotten old scholar won't even take the food given to him. He'll ignore it and continue to wait in the snow." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Then I bet that he will take the money and continue to wait for me to change my mind." Blue Bird quickly walked back and said softly, "Lu Wenbao accepted the money and said that he would first go back to fill his stomach and buy a warm mink fur coat before coming back to wait for you. Before he left, he even asked me if there were any leftovers in the post house. If there were, he could just save some expenses." Xiao Chong covered his mouth and laughed. Xianyuan Qingfeng clicked his tongue and said, "This old man's skin is really thick. Birds of a feather flock together with you. In the future, there's an 80% chance you'll have a good chat." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Even if we don't win or lose, let's do it. How about we make another bet? We'll add another 100 taels to the bet. Let's bet on how many days this Lu Wenbao will wait. Of course, that's if I ignore him before then." Xianyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "Then I'll have to know how many days you'll stay in the capital." Without waiting for Su Fengnian to reply, she said confidently, "I bet that the old man will wait for as long as you stay in the capital." Su Fengnian stood up and stretched out his hand to catch the cold snowflakes. "I hope I lose. 200 taels of gold for a true scholar. Bailiang won't lose out." Su Fengnian stood under the eaves and stretched out his hand to catch the snow. Unknowingly, he caught a handful of snow. The girl, who was also a young girl, watched without blinking. When he turned around to ask her, she was completely unaware. Xianyuan Qingfeng chose a rattan chair and lay down. He held his forehead and looked at the snow while swaying. Su Fengnian waved his hand in front of the sweet-tempered girl with a warm expression. She finally came back to her senses. She was so ashamed that she wanted to hide in the snow. Su Fengnian knew that she was thin-skinned and was completely different from the one lying on the chair beside him. He repeated, "I heard that you learned the guqin. Can you lend it to me?" She bit her lip and nodded. "I'll go get it for you." Su Fengnian smiled warmly. "It doesn't matter if you walk a little slower." Although the girl nodded vigorously, she still turned around and ran away. It was obvious that she didn't listen to him. Xianyuan Qingfeng twitched the corner of his mouth and slowly said, "Infatuated." The girl ran quickly with the guqin. When she took off the cloth, her fingers were still trembling. Su Fengnian thanked her and took the new guqin that wasn't very valuable. With a wave of his sleeve, the 12 flying swords hovered in the air and formed the guqin. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and hung his arms in the air. He wasn't in a hurry to play the guqin. Bailiang had millions of households. How many of them were wrapped in iron clothes and withered bones? Listen to who's beating the beauty drum and see who's the butcher of the Yang realm. Who can sleep with the stars in the sky? Su Fengnian lowered his head. His eyes were red and his lips were trembling. He suddenly hit the guqin with one hand. It was a brilliant Baoyang spirit-suppressing song. The sound of the guqin in the snow was like the thunderous hooves of the Baoyang cavalry. An old Confucian scholar was squatting under the dragon claw locust tree in the Dima Wei Inn. He bought an old mink fur coat from a pawnshop and was stuffing meat buns into his mouth. After hearing the guqin, he slowly stopped wolfing down the food and leaned against the cold old locust tree. He closed his eyes and softly said, "How nice it would be to have a pot of green ants." Chapter 730. In a secluded courtyard, the swordsman Cui Hua, who liked to close her eyes when she was not pickling pickled vegetables, stood under the eaves to admire the snow. The green-clothed swordsman Wu Luding squatted on the steps, waiting for the bastard to return from the sword competition. In the midst of the snowstorm, the wanderer who had used his silver to exchange for a set of clean clothes pushed open the door and entered in a sloppy manner. After entering, he patted the snow off his shoulders. Wu Luding touched on a sore spot and asked, "When Busheng, you lost again?" The wooden sword Wen Hua, who had an additional sword at his waist, glared at him and said, "What are you talking about? 6 vats, you're just a man who lives off a woman. If you don't have Cui Hua and pickled vegetables, see if I don't cut you to death." The Wu family sword crown, who had no objection to this, said with a smile, "Oh, where did you pick up this sword? Look at it, it's not vague at all. Let me take a look." Wen Hua said carelessly, "My sword is my little wife. Can you touch it as you please?" The corner of Cui Hua's mouth curled up. Wu Luding, who had a frivolous temperament, clicked his tongue and said, "Then this time you brought back a new wife. Aren't you afraid that you'll like the new and dislike the old, and that your old wife will be jealous?" Wen Hua slapped the wooden sword. "Nonsense. I've always liked the new and not the old. No, I like the old and not the new. The name of this new sword is very big. If I tell you, I'm afraid you'll be scared to death. Although it's a good sword, compared to this wooden sword of mine that has been with me for more than 10 years, it's still lacking." In the end, Wen Busheng did not disappoint. He was still unable to win the sword duel. However, this time, compared to the previous 3 defeats, it was a draw. Afterwards, Tang Shi Sword Immortal even gifted the ancient sword Ba Xiu to him. That brother did not hesitate and hung it on his waist without saying anything. The people of the capital were all used to this guy's indecent behavior of pulling out his pants in front of a sword duel. When he competed with Qi Jiajie in the sword duel, it was even more immoral. Qi Jiajie, who had been the #1 swordsman of the capital for many years, was just about to return the favor when Wen Busheng began to shout that he would not fight anymore. Then, without saying anything, he ran away like a wisp of smoke. Not to mention the people of Jianghu who were watching the duel were dumbfounded. Even Qi Jiajie himself did not know whether to laugh or cry. He was so shocked by the 2 swords that he broke out in cold sweat. After painstakingly withstanding the 2 swords that were both outstanding in terms of sword force and sword intent, he saw that kid run away without saying anything. The commoners who were watching the duel all laughed and booed. Wu Luding glanced at Lu Baijie's Ba Xiu sword and said with a smile, "Tens of thousands of wooden swords can't be exchanged for a sword forged from Tang Shi sword furnace. Falling into your hands, you've really met the wrong person." Poor Ba Xiu, winking at a blind person. Wen Hua was in a good mood today, so he did not lower himself to the same level as the 6 vats. He jogged under the eaves to hide from the snow. He shook his sleeves and then turned his head to look at the female sword attendant who was clearly not blind but was pretending to be blind. He asked, "Cui Hua, why haven't you given your brother Wen a bowl of pickled cabbage noodles? You're too careless. In the future, when I become famous, even if you beg me to eat your pickled cabbage noodles and pickled cabbage fish, it'll still depend on my mood." The woman who usually did not open her eyes, but when she opened her eyes during the Battle of the Reed Marsh, she imitated Li Chuangong's 2-sleeved green snake. The corners of her mouth twitched, and she turned around to go downstairs. Wen Hua squatted beside Wu Luding and muttered in a low voice, "6 vats, I only told you the truth because I treat you as half a friend. Cui Hua's appearance is average, and she can't compare to Miss Li, whom I like. However, Cui Hua's temper is good, and you're not tired of eating pickled cabbage. In any case, you won't have any great prospects in your lifetime. Being together with her, you'll be taking a huge advantage. Wu Luding smiled and said, only you, Wen Busheng, are allowed to have great prospects, but I, Wu Luding, am not allowed to have great achievements? Wen Hua had never avoided using words to hurt others. He said, you're no good. You're far inferior to Cui Hua. I, Wen Hua, am incomparably accurate in judging people and swords. Wu Luding laughed in anger and said, why don't we have a match? Wen Hua exploded like a wild cat. Oh, you have Cui Hua backing you up. You're full of guts. Let's have a match. However, I'll say this first. I've easily defeated you in a single move, so don't get angry and ask me to move out of the courtyard. You're also not allowed to immediately return the money you used to buy the clothes. Also, you have to let me live in that large room of yours. I, Wen Hua, am now a great swordsman whose name resounds throughout the capital. I have to keep up with all the basic necessities. Wu Luding was tormented by Wen Hua's nagging to the point that he completely lost his temper. That little bit of competitive spirit that had just revealed its sharp edges rapidly vanished like smoke into thin air. He said helplessly, match my ass. I'm not going to compete. Even if I win against you, Wen Busheng, I don't have the slightest bit of benefit. If I lose, then I'll really fall into the latrine pit. Wen Hua laughed loudly and slapped the shoulder of the sword tomb with all his strength. Are you afraid? It's fine, there's no shame. Wu Luding couldn't be bothered to waste his breath with this fellow. He closed his mouth and admired the goose feather-like snow that ceaselessly fell from the courtyard. Wen Hua suddenly thought of something. He took down the wooden sword and bent down to meticulously carve a word on the snow. He turned around and asked, 6 vats. Do you recognize it? There was the word, fortune, on the snow. Wu Luding rolled his eyes in response. Wen Hua laughed to himself. When I was roaming the Jianghu with my brother all those years ago, we stole sweet potatoes and roasted them for a big meal. After that, we comfortably took a dump in the wilderness. When we had nothing to do, he took a tree branch and wrote this word. Do you know what he said? Wu Luding laughed lightly. There's a saying for the word fortune? Chapter 731. Wen Hua's face was full of disdain as he said, the word, fu, refers to clothes and a field. Do you understand what it means? It's a great fortune to not have to worry about food and clothing. The meaning here is great, you, 6 vats, naturally wouldn't understand. My brother has a lot of crooked guts, but in terms of appearance, he's even more handsome than me. However, he's also very knowledgeable. Give him a tattered Taoist robe and he can pretend to be a god and cheat people of their money. He can also gamble chess with people in small alleys or help people write letters. His handwriting is beautiful. I'm not boasting, but every time we go to shit or pee, that kid who knows feng shui points to a place with good feng shui before he unbuckles his belt. Tell me, even though I'm a little poor, isn't that awesome? Wu Luding looked at the falling snow that was trying to cover the word, fu. He even waved his sword to the wanderer beside him, as if the sword had broken the vitality that connected heaven and earth. He smiled lightly and said, these days, other than listening to you brag about how powerful your sword art is, I've also heard you talk about this young master called Xiaoyan. My ears are getting calluses. For the first time, Wen Hua said seriously, 6 vats, remember 2 things. You're not allowed to touch my wooden sword. Secondly, you're not allowed to speak ill of my brother. When I say good things about him, you can listen if you like, but if you don't, you can cover your ears. Wu Luding smiled warmly and said, I like to hear it. Go ahead. Cui Hua brought over a bowl of chewy pickled vegetable noodles. Wen Hua sheathed his wooden sword and took the bowl and chopsticks. With a few mouthfuls, he finished the bowl and returned it to the sword attendant. He licked his lips and smiled, give me another bowl, another bowl. Cui Hua, with your skills, it's a pity that you don't become a chef. What's the point of practicing swordsmanship? In the future, you and 6 vat will open a small restaurant and I'll support you guys every day. Think about it, by that time, I'll definitely be one of the top swordsmanship masters in the world. If I support you guys, your business will definitely prosper. Wu Luding touched his forehead. He really wanted to kick this bastard to death. He had just eaten other people's pickled vegetable noodles and he still wanted to encourage Cui Hua not to practice swordsmanship. He didn't want to cover up his limelight. Cui Hua, on the other hand, smiled faintly and turned around to cook noodles for Wen Hua. Wen Hua wiped his mouth and sighed with emotion as he gazed at the fortune character that was gradually disappearing in the snow. I promised old man Huang, who taught me how to practice the sword, that I would kill someone for him. After that, I would stop fooling around with him and live a good life with Miss Li. She said that she would marry me once I became the most famous swordsman in the world. In my opinion, after fighting with Zhe Hua, Qi Jiajie, and Bai Changjiang, wouldn't I become the most famous swordsman in the capital? In fact, it wasn't too difficult. After a few more years of practice, I would go out of the capital and find 6 or 9 swordsman masters and swordsman masters. After a round of swordsmanship, I would have the face to propose marriage to her. Apart from Xiaoyan, I don't have any other friends. When the time comes, if you're willing, you can come to my wedding. If you're not willing, then forget it. In any case, I don't care about your little gift money. Wu Luding nodded and said calmly, I once overturned a boat with a pole on the river and intercepted a young man. Later on, when I was in Xiangfan City, I almost encountered him again. Unfortunately, he was also called Su Fengyan, His Royal Highness from Beiliang. When Hua laughed and said, His Highness from Beiliang? Then my Xiaoyan can't compare to him. This brother of mine is just a young master from an ordinary and well-off family. He went out to study and got along as miserably as me. Wu Luding narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, What if it's the same person? When Hua waved his hand and said without hesitation, Impossible. After pausing for a moment, the wooden sword ranger said with a smile, So what if it's the same person? He's not my brother? When Hua's crotch was somewhat depressed, he stretched out his hand and groped, then said with a sigh, What if it's really the same person? I won't be able to take out that erotic painting of mine. In the alley outside the small courtyard, the accumulated snow was deep. Squeaking sounds could be heard when one stepped on it. A carriage with ordinary decorations stopped. A corner of the curtain was lifted, and an old man and a peerless beauty who was reputed to be both beautiful and beautiful sat inside. The woman who was ranked in the Rouge ranking smiled and said, Let him kill Su Fengyan? It was precisely that old man Huang. His expression was calm as he nodded. The peerless beauty had a fragrant pouch with a white jade lion rolling an embroidered ball on her waist. After getting the answer, she sighed lightly. The old man's surname was Huang, his name was Longshi, and he called himself Huang Sanjia. He said with an expressionless face, after meeting Wen Hua, Try your best to be virtuous and virtuous. You'll personally cook dinner. When he sent you off, he inadvertently said that your enemy is in Beiliang. However, don't say who exactly it is, lest you make a fool of yourself and spoil my plan. The white jade lion who won the title of the world's most famous courtesan smiled sweetly and said, Then what should I do with the crown prince of Beiliang? Huang Sanjia smiled and said, I'll arrange for you to meet him at a suitable time and place. When the time comes, even if Su Fengyan doesn't want your chastity, you won't be able to have it anymore. Li Baishe restrained his smile and said calmly, My life was given to me by you, teacher. Why would I care about that little bit of chastity? The old man sat cross-legged on the ground and said, Wen Hua doesn't value righteousness. He only values relationships. However, relationships in the world can be divided into the love between men and women and the love between brothers. I'd like to see if this kid is willing to give up his sword, which has the potential to become a land immortal, and his beloved woman in exchange for a brotherhood formed in a short span of a year. After she got off the carriage, she gathered the snow-white fox fur coat draped over her body and muttered, How pitiful! The word, fortune, in the courtyard had disappeared. Chapter 732. The snow was unwilling to stop, as if a naughty child was crying non-stop. In the backyard of the Demoyai post house, the dragon-claw locust tree was covered in white. The young kamikaze built a snowman in the courtyard and used 2 pieces of charcoal as eyes. Su Fengyan saw Xianyuan Qingfeng rocking back and forth on the rattan chair. He didn't want her to be happy alone, so he asked Tong Zhui to bring another rattan chair into the courtyard. The two of them chatted while lying under the eaves. When Tong Ziliang brought the chair over, Su Fengnian asked a few questions about the sword duel between Liu Baijie, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. He was lying on the chair, muttering to himself, surnamed Wen, carrying a wooden sword. Don't tell me you're Wen Hua? Xinyuan Qingfeng sneered. Him. Su Fengnian was unhappy. He squinted. What's wrong with Wen Hua? When the three of us met at the lantern market, I didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. How are you any better? What about me now? I stole the so-called Confucian noble spirit to nurture my saber intent, then borrowed the strength of my nascent soul to tear 2,000 feet apart on the imperial path. Tell me more about yourself. Xinyuan Qingfeng remained silent. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled. Bringing you to the capital this time can't hide from those sneaky eyes. This can be considered your second pledge of allegiance. I'll find a chance to compensate you later. Xinyuan Qingfeng turned around and smiled playfully. I just realized that doing business with you isn't a loss. Su Fengnian smiled. That's true. Xinyuan Qingfeng asked curiously, you brought a Bailiang saber this time. Why didn't you bring the spring thunder? Why did you only bring the spring autumn? Su Fengnian said calmly, you only have second-level inner force. Why would I bring so many weapons? Do you think I'm a weapon store owner? Xinyuan Qingfeng sneered. You're lying through your teeth. What's 12 flying swords? Su Fengnian said helplessly, the spring-autumn is in my hands. It's very difficult. Xinyuan Qingfeng asked, what do you mean? Su Fengnian gently exhaled, blowing away a few snowflakes that had flown diagonally under the eaves. He calmly said, I don't know why, but from time to time, there will be a trembling sound in spring and autumn. Xinyuan Qingfeng didn't ask any more questions. She didn't covet that sword at all. Su Fengnian continued, at first, I wanted to give this sword to the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. Later, when he died, I thought that it would be good to give it to Dong Tai as a return gift. However, I reckon that he wouldn't accept it. Moreover, I might not be able to see him again in this lifetime. I'm just thinking that if I were to meet that brat Wen Hua, I might as well just give it to him. It's easy for him to abduct women when he goes out and shows off his wealth. The purple-robed Xinyuan Qingfeng reclined on the chair with his eyes closed. I really don't know why a dignified heir of Bailiang would care so much about a good-for-nothing debauchee. Su Fengnian smiled and narrowed his phoenix eyes. The haze in his heart these days was swept away. He said softly, it's good that you don't understand. The woman in the fox fur coat lightly knocked on the door. Wu Luding, who had been crouching under the eaves in a daze, frowned. After releasing the door, he lazily said, come in. Li Baisher lowered her head and stepped over the wooden door. She performed a curtsy toward the Wu family's sword crown. Wu Luding called when bushing into the room. Someone was looking for him. Wen Hua, who was lying on the bed admiring the Ba Xiu ancient sword, put on his wooden sword and walked out while cursing. When he saw the woman in the courtyard, he was pleasantly surprised. He didn't try to hide anything and jogged over with an embarrassed smile. He stopped a few steps in front of her and said, Miss Li, why have you come? Let me know in advance so that I can borrow money from 6 vats and find a bigger place to entertain guests. In any case, lending him 10 taels is no different than lending him 100 taels. It's fate that brings men of the Jianghu together, so we can't be stingy. Don't you think so? 6 vats I picked up from the side of the road? Wu Luding looked at the rogue wanderer who was trying his best to signal him with his eyes. He just rolled his eyes and turned to look at the other side of the courtyard wall. Li Baisher held a bamboo basket of fresh fruits and vegetables in her hand. In the basket, there were also a few carps that had been chiseled out of the lake not long ago. They were still alive and kicking when strung through the gills with a straw rope. She said softly, have you eaten? If you haven't, I'm not going the same way this time. But I can make you a meal while I'm at it. Wen Hua, who had only eaten 2 bowls of pickled vegetable noodles, scratched his head and said, I ate 2 bowls of noodles, but it didn't help. Li Baisher smiled sweetly. I'll make it for you now. If it doesn't suit your taste, just say it directly. Next time, you can make up for your mistakes. Wen Hua said with a mischievous smile, don't worry. I'm not a hypocritical person. I always say what I want to say. Chapter 733. She softly glanced at him. Wen Hua recalled the first time the two of them met and laughed involuntarily. She walked towards the inner room and just so happened to brush past the sword-made Cui Hua. Between women, they would only nod and stop. Li Baisher, who was rarely seen by the capital's famous scholars, actually went to cook. Wu Luding squatted, Cui Hua stood, and Wen Hua was at a loss of what to do at the door. After hesitating for a long time, he still came to Wu Liuding's side and leaned against the pillar whose red paint had long been peeled off. It was snowing heavily. After Wen Hua practiced swordsmanship, he did not know how high his achievements were, but now he was no longer afraid of the cold. However, he still subconsciously pulled his sleeves. As a small person who was used to living a poor life, every time it snowed heavily in winter, his clothes were thin and he had nowhere to hide. He would gnash his teeth in hatred and wish he could pull down God and beat him up. Not to mention the expensive fur coat on Li Baisher's body, the poor people could not even bear to burn a stove of charcoal. Back then, Wen Hua lived under someone else's roof and endured the years together with his brother and sister-in-law. His sister-in-law despised him for not doing his job properly, and his heart was higher than the sky. His brother always protected him, but it was inevitable that he would be nagged by his sister-in-law. Wen Hua also knew his own virtue. His mouth was mean and his words were vicious. He had never said a few good words to his sister-in-law. In fact, she was not a bad person. For so many years, she had let him eat and drink for free. Although her words were a little unpleasant, she had never really thought of driving him out of the house to suffer. Therefore, his brother was not a person inside and outside. In a fit of anger, Wen Hua ran away from home and did a lot of sneaky things. Then he bumped into little Nian. At that time, they were stealing melons from a melon farm. Both of them had a guilty conscience and fought with wits for a long time. Only then did he know that they were the same kind of people. That melon farm was completely destroyed. After they got together, little Nian always teased him that he would pounce on any woman with breasts and buttocks. Such love at first sight was worthless. How could Wen Hua understand love? It was just like how a starving person would think that a steamed bun was the most delicious food in the world. During that bleak but not lonely journey, the number of times he fell in love at first sight could not be counted with his 2 hands. When the two parted, little Nian said that all good things must come to an end. Wen Hua's eyes turned sour at that time. In addition, he also felt that it was not a good thing to always follow little Nian to eat and drink, so he happily turned around and traveled alone in Jianghu, all the way to the northwest. Then he met Miss Li near Xiangfan City. The first time he saw her, she came down from a luxurious carriage and bent over to put a piece of silver into the broken bowl of a little beggar with a broken leg. At that time, Wen Hua saw her not only give the money, but also smiled and touched the little beggar's head. At that time, Wen Hua told himself that this love at first sight was his last time. Because little Nian, who liked to talk nonsense and convince people the most, once said that it was not a big deal for a woman to be beautiful. If a beautiful woman had a good heart, if he did not snatch her home and love her dearly, she deserved to be struck by lightning. At that time, Wen Hua rushed forward without thinking of his own safety and stopped the carriage on the street. As usual, he used the 3 tricks of a ruffian in the marketplace to tease a woman from a good family. There was nothing new about it. He asked the young lady's name, young lady's age, and where did she live. However, Wen Hua also added that he was a wanderer who was determined to practice swordsmanship and become a peerless swordsman. He did not act shamelessly and only hoped that the young lady could wait for a few more years until he made a name for himself. If there was no news of him after a few years, then she did not have to wait for him. At first, Wen Hua thought that only a fool would believe his sincere words. However, the young lady really told him her name and even asked him if he did not mind that she was a woman from a brothel. Wen Hua said that he did not mind. Then she said that she would wait for him for 3 years. She really did wait for him for 3 years. When they met again, it was already in the vast capital. Wen Hua had suffered countless supercilious looks. Even if he was ridiculed as when bushing, at least there were no small fish or shrimps who could not treat him as a dish. When Wen Hua practiced swordsmanship, he did not seek profit or money. He only sought fame, and he only sought to vent the anger that he had suppressed for too many years. Su Fengnian said that eating, drinking, and defecating was not the most common thing in a person's life. Instead, it was the inhalation and exhalation. When it was the last time that one exhaled without inhaling, one would die with one's eggs facing the sky. At that time, the exhalation before death was manly. There seemed to be a saying about how wine entered one's intestines, one inhaled sword aura, and one exhaled to destroy the 5 great mountains. The first half was straightforward, when Hua remembered it clearly. However, the second half was sour, so he could not remember it too clearly. After practicing swordsmanship with Old Man Huang, he had been fiercely suppressing his anger. He gritted his teeth, thinking about how he could one day exhale and shake the Jianghu, make that Miss Li look at him with admiration, and make Xiaoyan feel that he, Wen Hua, had not made friends with him in vain. The new Dong Tai's peach blossom branch was an invincible killing sword. Wen Hua did not want to learn it. The old god of swords, Li Chuangong's swordsmanship was for the later generations to split open the mountains, meet water, and boil water. He could not learn it. Wen Hua only wanted to practice his own swordsmanship. He wanted to practice his swordsmanship, marry his beloved wife, and live a stable life. Then he would have a good reunion with his brother, Su Fengnian, and slowly repay the debt of wine, meat, and kindness from that year. Li Baisher made a table full of dishes, which looked, smelled, and tasted good. Looking at them, even if Wen Hua was not hungry, he still felt hungry. He wolfed down the food. She only picked up a few vegetables with her chopsticks, and then stopped moving her chopsticks. She only looked at this young man. She wanted to laugh, but she could not. On the other hand, Wen Hua picked up some food with his chopsticks for her. He said with a smile, "Eat more. Your body is important. It doesn't matter if you get fat. In any case, you're too good-looking. It doesn't matter if you don't look good a little bit." This time, Li Baisher finally smiled. The meal in the shabby alley and shabby room quickly came to an end. She did not forget to clean up the bowls and chopsticks like a diligent and thrifty housewife. She only took the basket and left. Wen Hua naturally wanted to see her off, but she only saw him off to the alley outside the courtyard. They were silent the whole way. Before turning the corner, she said softly, "Wen Hua, remember to become the most famous swordsman in the world. You promised me." Wen Hua nodded heavily and said, "Don't worry about this. I even dare to kill the emperor. If worst comes to worst, I'll wander the world with you." He smiled and hurriedly added, "As long as you're willing." Li Baisher nodded and lowered her head. Her expression was complicated. When she raised her head, her eyes were clear. She said softly, "You're not allowed to see me off. Can you do that?" Wen Hua smiled and said, "I'll listen to you. But you have to be careful on the road." Li Baisher smiled charmingly. "That year, after the carriage I rode in moved, I secretly saw you standing behind it for a long time. This time you go first. I'll wait for you." Wen Hua laughed loudly and turned to leave. He did not drag his feet. He dragged his feet with snow and mud. Li Baisher gently clasped her hands and exhaled. She waited for Wen Hua to enter the courtyard before turning the corner and entering the carriage. She was somewhat stunned when she saw that the old man was still there. Huang Sanja said in a flat tone, "I went to the vicinity of the lower horseway once and was targeted by that half-inch tongue of Yuan Benshi. There are some things that have to be done in advance." Li Baisher said with a trembling voice, "You're going to tell Wen Hua directly just like that?" But the sword crown and sword attendant of the Wu family's sword tomb are still in the courtyard. Huang Longsher said with a smile, "I intercepted and killed Su Fengnian in the Xiang Fan City's Reed Marsh. These 2 people were originally one of my moves to move the sword tomb. Sit with me for a while. After about 2 hours, I'll go to the courtyard. You wait for news. When you return, open this brocade pouch." Li Baisher took the brocade pouch. Her hands and feet were ice cold. 2 hours later, Huang Longsher slowly walked down from the carriage. The carriage gradually went far away, disappearing into the wind and snow. Huang Longsher was not in a hurry to enter the courtyard. Instead, he walked back and forth in the alley twice before pushing the door open. After a short period of time, a young man with a broken arm, a lame leg, and all the tendons and veins in his body, left with only one life left. He only carried the wooden sword that originally belonged to him and left the courtyard. There was a long trail of blood on the snow in the alley. In Laozi's hometown, if you borrow money, you have to pay back 12 or 13 taels. You taught me, Wenhua, how to use a sword. I'll cripple all my martial arts and return you an arm and a leg. In the courtyard, he said these words to the old man Huang. Then this bloody man in the snow squatted down dejectedly at the corner. Beside his hand was only a wooden sword stained with blood. The young wanderer's eyes were blurred with tears. He smiled mournfully and stood up. He aimed the wooden sword at the wall and fiercely broke it. After that, there was no more news of Wenhua in Jianghu. This wooden sword wanderer whose name shook the world as soon as he appeared in Jianghu left Jianghu in the most resolute and desolate manner in one night. In the bone-piercing snow, he said to himself one last time, I won't practice the sword anymore. Chapter 734. I still know how to write the second chapter, but it's very late. Apologies. This year, before the beginning of winter, the snow in the capital was especially majestic and did not stop. While many children in the capital were overjoyed, they were also puzzled as to how many white geese were raised by the heavens above. In this small courtyard that could be described as having a dragon spirit, there were originally 3 heavenly talents who had the potential to carry the cauldron of swordsmanship. In one night, one of the 3 had left. When Wu Luding was bored, he liked to take the bamboo pole that was only slightly longer than a sword. At this moment, he was squatting under the eaves, carrying the pole on his shoulder. He was somewhat lonely. Even if his childhood sweetheart Cui Hua was standing beside him, this young sword crown who did not learn the sword of the king but learned the sword of the tyrannical way was somewhat sad. When the words of the wandering hero entered his ears, he left the hospital with only one life left. He broke an arm and a leg tendon, destroyed his own acupuncture points, and left just like that. When Bushing, didn't you say you wanted to become one of the few great swordsmen in the world? Didn't you just see the girl you adored? Wouldn't it be better to kill a man who had no relatives and only a year of friendship and then become famous? Cui Hua sensed that the young sword crown had turned his head. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Without needing Wu Luding to ask, she opened her mouth and said, I don't understand either. In the Battle of the Reed Marshes, the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, was the old king of Jing and Zhao Sun, who used this person's brotherhood with the famous general Wang Mingyang of the spring and autumn period as shackles to lure him out of the Jianghu. That when Hua had just entered the Jianghu, how could he leave the Jianghu in such a miserable state? Wu Luding, who often bickered with Wen Bushing these days, let go of his hand. The bamboo pole rolled to the ground. He fiercely rubbed his cheeks. I have no brothers, no friends. I wholeheartedly pursue the path of the sword, but I will remember this idiot for the rest of my life. Why don't we send Wenhua off? In this world of ice and snow, he can leave the courtyard, but he can't leave the capital. Cui Hua remained silent. Sword Crown, who was nicknamed 6 Vats every day, spat out a mouthful of murky air. He calmly stood up and said, Don't worry about that old bastard in the house who is scheming against who knows who. If he really pisses me off, then we'll just have a falling out and go our separate ways. I didn't like this place in the capital. It didn't have the taste of the Jianghu and didn't have any human feelings. It wasn't easy for me to find a bit of sword flavor that the Wu family's sword tomb didn't have, but it was too late. Cui Hua, why don't we go to the South Sea after we protect Wen Bushing out of the capital? I heard that Dong Tai went out to sea to visit immortals. Maybe we can meet him. Cui Hua patted the Su of Gojoseon's sword on her back, and Wu Luding left the hospital with a laugh. Huang Sanjia slowly walked out of the house, holding the ancient sword Ba Xiu in his hand. His face was expressionless, without the slightest ripple of emotion. He only threw Ba Xiu toward the top of the wall. The ancient sword fell into one person's hand. An old man with an empty sleeve squatted on the top of the wall. He single-handedly took the last sword from the Tangxi sword furnace. Abandoning the scabbard, he opened his palm and placed the simple and famous sword in the center of his palm. His thumb and index finger rubbed against each other. The sword tip and hilt, which were not among the top 3 swords in the world, were instantly bent. The sword tip and hilt collided with each other, like a dragon biting its tail. Due to the sword qi from his 2 fingers, this famous sword of the age actually broke from the middle. 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and so on. Ba Xiu broke into pieces inch by inch, and every inch of the sword fell into the sleeve of the broken arm. Then the old man picked a section of the sword tip and threw it into his mouth. It was as if he was chewing on soybeans, crunchy and full of chewiness. The old man might not have been truly nameless, but he had been nameless for 60 years. These past few years, he had occasionally entered the world, but he had always done business with Huang Longshi. Whenever he killed or injured people, Huang Longshi would be responsible for feeding him a good sword. If one were to talk about his magnificent achievements, there would be no exaggeration in the Jianghu. However, he was obsessed with the sword all his life. In almost 100 years, he had only taken in 2.5 disciples. The half was the wooden sword wanderer who disappointed him greatly, and the other was the more famous sword emperor of Shishu. However, the old man had also clearly said to Huang Sanjia that his 2 eldest disciples could not compare to a disciple who had only taken in halfway. It had nothing to do with talent. Talent did not completely equate to one's foundation. In the 1,000 years of the Jianghu, the way of the sword, which was close to the heavenly way, did not rely on the saying that one could accomplish anything by being amazing. Therefore, even though he had accepted the Ba Xiu sword that was slowly entering his stomach, the old man was very dissatisfied. The taste of this sword was not enough. He had come for the sword of spring and autumn. The Su of Gojoseon of the sword catacomb was actually not bad, but the sword he could not forget for the past 20 years was still the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword. The old man was missing an arm, but because of his tall and sturdy body, he did not appear to be very old. In particular, his 2 eyebrows were extremely long and tied into a snow-white long braid, just like the Beiliang, the Sun, and the Beimeng. The old man with willow-like eyebrows laughed cruelly. His voice was hoarse and honed like a night owl. He said eerily, "Huang Longshi, oh Huang Longshi, there are people in this world that you cannot predict and things that you cannot predict." Huang Longshi said calmly, "There is no one in this world who can predict everything. How the crops grow depends on both manpower and timing. I, Huang Longshi, am not conceited to the point that I want to be higher than the sky. When Hua is willing to destroy his own future, but it does not affect the overall situation." Chapter 735. The old man of unknown identity was obviously very happy to see Huang Longshi suffer, so he continued to rub salt into the wound. That brat when Hua killed the heir of Beiliang in the capital, preventing Beiliang from sticking to Liang like glue for half a day. At the very least, he wants that poor brat Su Fengnian to suffer from a mental illness so that you can continue to fish in troubled waters. Only you can make such a ruthless plan sound. Why, do you still think highly of that Chen Jibao? Do you feel that he's the destined master of 2 rivers and mountains? I'm too lazy to think too much about these things, but there's a debt I have to settle with you. You've invited old Wu of the Sword Tomb to come out of seclusion, so it's not good for me to eat Su of Gojoseon's sword. However, when Hua, this half-disciple of mine isn't just worth a Ba Xiu sword. Since you can't eat Su of Gojoseon's sword, then how are you going to satisfy my appetite for Su Fengnian's spring and autumn? Huang Longshi stepped into the courtyard and looked at the falling snow above him. I've never felt that anyone is destined. I just can't bear to see the lethargic spring and autumn. I can't bear to see so many things in this world being taken for granted. To me, I don't have any enemies or benefactors. Everything I do in this life is nothing more than taking rotten wood for new shoots to sprout. It was rare to hear someone speak his mind, so the bad-tempered old man didn't ask about the spring and autumn for the first time. He continued to leisurely put the broken sword into his mouth. Huang Longshi smiled and muttered to himself, "Fairness is the most difficult thing to achieve. Since Chao Changqing dared to bring the fallen princess Jiangxi and ruin the grand plan of slaying the dragon python that I've arranged for many years, I can make Su Fengnian suffer the consequences. However, even if Su Fengnian wins, I'm not someone who won't give up. Don't even think about the spring and autumn sword. I can let you fill your stomach. Come, let's go to Wu Wu City. Do you dare?" The old man finished eating Ba Xiu's body and threw away the hilt. "There are so many appetizers there, so why wouldn't I dare? Old Second Wang claims to be number 2 in the world for 60 years. I've long found him an eyesore. What number 2 in the world? More like number 3 in the world. Huang Sanjia nodded and smiled. Indeed, you are the only one in the world who dares to exchange arms with Li Chungang. The old man fell into deep thought. Huang Sanjia was not in a hurry to urge him to leave the city. Among the playboys in the world, for love, righteousness, and benevolence, most of them can't help but be trapped in their own cocoons. Wang Xianji is trapped in a city, Xianyuan Jingqing is trapped in a mountain, Chao Changqing is trapped in a country, Li Yishan is trapped in a building, and Li Dongxin is trapped in a zen. The one who has truly transcended the world is you, Yuan Benshi, who is now looking for me everywhere to seek revenge, and Dong Tai, who went out to sea. Counting with one's fingers, there is only Hong Shixiang, who rode a crane down Wudong, Li Chungang, who lost his arm, and Wen Hua, who folded his sword and did not practice the sword. Jiang Hu is destined to forget Wen Hua very soon, but it is precisely this kind of person that makes Jiang Hu lively and lively. I Huang Longshi lost? But I lost willingly. Because of Wen Hua, I will give Su Fengnian a big gift, otherwise this kid's life will be too miserable. At such a young age, he has to fight so hard with an old fox spirit like Yuan Benshi. The old man, who did not have a sword in his hand and liked to eat swords, jumped down from the top of the wall. His height was frightening. He was a full 2 heads taller than Huang Longshi. They say that a man's words are kind when he is about to die. Huang Longshi, could it be that you don't have much time left? Huang Sanjia smiled indifferently. How many years have you been waiting for me to die? The old man's eyebrows actually reached his knees. It doesn't matter whether you die or not, but where am I going to find a good seedling to inherit my sword? Huang Sanjia laughed softly. If it were up to me, you should use your sword to exchange for his spring and autumn sword. The spring and autumn sword is already dead. What's the use of it? The old man sneered. This is the big gift you are going to give to that kid? Huang Sanjia shook his head and walked towards the courtyard door. He waited for the old man, who had once single-handedly shouldered the prestige of the Wu family's sword tomb, to walk out of the courtyard first before closing the door. You and Wen Hua are not considered master and disciple, it's just a business deal between us. If we really count it, you have only taken in 2 disciples, and both of them died because of Bailiang. The old man laughed softly. This is nothing. A swordsman dying for his sword, there is no more fortunate death than this. Since you have piqued my interest, Huang Longshi, then you don't have to hide anything from me. Tell me, other than the kid from the Su family who made Wen Hua kill, who else was there? I have to go take a look. Li Chungang is the only swordsman that I see as a great enemy and confidant in my life. Since he taught that kid the 2-sleeved green snake and sword opening the gate of heaven, I have to go take a look. That female sword attendant only learned half of the 2-sleeved green snake. It's too little. If that kid is really as interesting as Li Chungang thinks so highly of him, I don't mind asking him to learn this sword of mine. Huang Longshi dismissed it with a laugh. When this eccentric old man taught people the sword, the worse your aptitude on the surface, the less he taught you. That Shi Shu sword emperor was taught 4 swords and comprehended 100 swords on his own. In the end, he devoted his entire life to the path of the sword, but none of his swords caught the old man's eyes. His disciple after that only taught him 3 swords, but one of his swords was praised by the old man endlessly. Then Huang Longshi tricked him into teaching Wen Hua 2 swords, but it was a pity that he did not get to see the crops grow this time. In the end, that kid still chose a golden millet dream, and not the famed sword that had the potential to reach the top, the most beautiful woman in the world. As for whether this crafty old man really met Su Fengnian, would he kill him without a word, or teach him that sword in a muddle-headed manner, it was not something that Huang Sanjia would think about. The reason why he brought up this matter was because of 1 sentence, or rather, 2 sentences. I will guard the northwest for the central plains. Outside of Bailiang's 3 prefectures, I will not suffer the calamity of Beimang's 1,000,000 cavalry. Huang Longshi smiled, a little reminiscent of himself when he was young. Huang Longshi looked at the white alley, bent down and grabbed a handful of snow and asked, Then let's get out of the city first, and then you'll enter? The old man did not say a word. The people of the world did not know that there was righteousness between heaven and earth, and that everything was manifold. This aura was majestic and cold, and it would last for eternity. Huang Longshu raised his head and smiled. Yuan Binshi, no matter how I die, I won't die in your hands. But you have to wait, there will naturally be someone who will deal with you. The white clothes case in the capital, new and old debts, let's see how you will pay. Chapter 736. Wu Luding was carrying a half-dead bastard who was still nagging Cui Hua to carry him. While feeling resentful, he also felt relieved. He could still talk glibly, which meant that his heart had not given up yet. With the sword in my hand, the heart of the sword is the most precious. The body is just a bag of skin, but it is secondary. If the heart of the sword is stained with dirt, then it is destined to never enter the realm of transformation. Wu Luding flew across the snowy ground. In front of him, Cui Hua carried the Su of Gojoseon's sword to open the way. The capital's night guard was stricter than normal people could imagine. However, the night guards and some elite spies in this large area of the capital had already received orders from above. They could close one eye to the three people's whereabouts. As long as they did not commit acts of murder and robbery, they would not pay any attention to them. Therefore, the sword-crowned swordsmen went against the rules and their journey was unimpeded. Wu Luding arrived at a courtyard. He did not knock on the door and wanted to directly jump over the wall. However, the snow in the courtyard suddenly slanted like thousands of swords. Cui Hua, who was obediently going to push the door, completely ignored him. Wu Luding was forced back into the small alley. He shrunk his neck and could only follow behind Cui Hua. Entering the elegant courtyard from the courtyard door, there was no one in the courtyard. Wu Luding hurriedly shouted, Old ancestor, we are in a hurry to leave the city. You have a lot of face, can you lead the way? There was only a small lamp in the room. It was silent. Wu Luding looked at Cui Hua with a bitter face. The latter calmly said, I hope the tomb master can help. An ordinary voice came out, How much of the two swords have you learned? Cui Hua opened her eyes and slowly said, 90% of the form, 60% of the spirit. There was a soft sound of acknowledgement from inside the room. The thin old man bent his index finger and slowly walked out. There was a small lamp on the tip of his finger. He did not even look at Wu Luding. He frowned and asked, What happened? Wu Luding was just about to speak when the old man flicked his finger. The small lamp suddenly arrived. Cui Hua was indifferent, and Wu Luding closed his eyes and waited for death. The lamp leisurely returned to the old man's fingertip, like a moldy and withered tree. The lifeless old man carried the lamp out of the courtyard and entered a carriage. The coachman was an old man who was even older than the old man. Some people would even believe that he was 60 years old. In fact, this man was 40 years old. He believed that his swordsmanship had reached a bottleneck, so he went to the Wu family's sword tomb to retrieve a sword. In the end, he became a withered swordsman of the Wu family. At 60 years old, he became the sword attendant of the old man in the carriage. Now, he was old enough to compete with Wudong Mountain's alchemist, Song Jiming. Wu Luding carried Wen Hua and sat in the carriage. Cui Hua continued to lead the way. The carriage drove towards the central axle road. The old man gently flicked his finger, and the lamp came out of the carriage. It was still in front of Cui Hua, and the thick snow on the road immediately melted. The old man sat down and asked softly, This is Wen Hua? Wu Luding was a straightforward person who couldn't hold back his words. He spilled the beans from a bamboo tube. This kid has a one-track mind. Huang Longshu, that 1,000-year-old bastard, taught him to practice the sword so that he could kill that Bailiang heir's brother, Su Fengyan. He refused. Not only did he leave the Ba Xiu sword that he won from Lu Baijie to that bastard, he even broke the wooden sword that he valued more than his own life. Even if he lost an arm and a leg, it's fine. After all, with Li Chuangong's example, it's not impossible for him to make a comeback. But this kid lost the wooden sword and destroyed his acupoints. He's like a broken dam, not a single bit is left. How the hell is he going to practice the sword in the future? What did you say about lending me 10 taels of silver to return 12 or 13 taels of silver? You've lost everything, not even 20 taels of silver. When bushing, has your head been kicked by a donkey? When Hua leaned against the wall of the carriage, his entire body reeking of blood. He gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. The old man said calmly, "If I didn't do this, do you think Huang Longshi would have let him live? Huang Longshi, that madman, when has he ever cared about old friendships? No one can understand the logic in his stomach. Since you're his chess piece, if you want to leave the chessboard alive, you're no different from a dead person." Wu Luding snorted coldly. The old man kept his eyes closed and his tone was still gentle. "Luding, if it was you, you wouldn't be able to practice the sword like him? Fine, if you think so, I'll break one arm and one arm of yours, destroy your cultivation and throw you to the sword mountain. We'll talk about it again when you feel that you can practice the sword." Wu Luding didn't think that the old ancestor was joking at all. He quickly smiled apologetically. "Old ancestor, don't be angry. I'm just feeling unworthy for when bushing. If he can practice the sword, he can practice the sword 10,000 times." The old man opened his eyes and looked at the young wanderer who was drenched in blood. He asked, "You're all alone now. You're empty now. It's time for you to turn from bad to good. Have you ever thought of returning to the sword mound with me?" When Hua covered his broken arm with one hand, his face was as pale as the snow outside the carriage. He shook his head and said with an unusually clear gaze, "I know you're the great old ancestor of the Wu family's sword mound. But I've said that I won't practice the sword anymore. I won't touch the sword for the rest of my life." The old man dismissed it with a smile. He didn't force it and closed his eyes. The floating light on the street was a sword. The snow outside the carriage was a sword. Even the capital city could be a sword. The sword itself was a sword. How could it be determined whether one had a sword or not? Wu Luding stared with his eyes wide open. His face was full of shock. The old ancestor was actually smiling. Before the carriage arrived, the city gates slowly opened. It could be seen that the Wu family's sword mound wasn't as far away from right and wrong as the rumors said. The coachman got off the carriage and handed the reins to Cui Hua, who was also a sword attendant. Before the head of the Wu family got off the carriage, he wiped his 2 fingers and extinguished the light outside the carriage. He said, "Wen Hua, I'll remember this name. When you remember that you're lacking a sword, you might as well come to the sword mound to take a look. 800 years of hidden swords, collecting swords and snatching swords. Sword Mountain has hundreds of thousands of swords piled up into a mountain. If you don't have the sword you want by then, it won't be too late to leave the mound." When Hua was still stubbornly shaking his head, Wu Luding wished he could slap this untactful Wen Bushing to the ground and bury him in the snow. The old man of the Wu family, who was known as the Su of Gojoseon, stood on the street with his sword attendant and watched the carriage leave the city. The heavy snow behind them quickly covered the seemingly endless imperial road. Chapter 737. The old man muttered to himself. Outsiders mistakenly thought that the withered sword of the Wu family was the emotionless sword. They were gravely mistaken. This time, Lu Ding should understand this logic. The emotionless way of heaven never meant that the people of the world were heartless, but fairness. If a person is emotionless, not to mention carrying a sword, he is not even fit to be a human. The sword attendant beside Su of Gojoseon did not move at all. The old man looked back. "I don't know why, but from here to the palace, there are a total of 18 doors. I always feel that in the future, there will be a junior who can pass through them with one sword." The carriage drove half a mile out of the capital. Inside the carriage, Wen Bushing suddenly said, "Let me take another look." Cui Hua stopped the carriage and hung up the curtain. Wu Luding supported this fellow and looked towards the capital. Wu Luding said softly, "Regretting? It's not too late. The swordsman that my ancestor has set his eyes on is at most one hand. If you want to go to the sword tomb, I will send you there." When Hua sat upright and looked straight at the capital, "There is something that I wanted to tell you too for a long time. In the past, I was narrow-minded and was afraid that if you two listened to me, your swordsmanship would improve by leaps and bounds, so I hid it from you. Since I don't practice swordsmanship anymore, I will say a few more words. Whether it makes sense or not, I am not sure. Whether you want to listen or not is your business. Lu Ding, You practice the tyrannical way of sword, but since I know that Su Fengnian is really the son of Butcher Su Shao, then I believe that the so-called tyrannical way is not really heartless. Because I believe that to be able to raise a son like Shao Nian, the king of Bailiang who conquered the spring and autumn period, must be a good old man. Also, Cui Hua, you can learn from the king of Bailiang's birth sword. As for how to reverse it, I can't say. You have to use your brain. Anyway, other than being smart, you are still smart. Actually, I don't know anything about swordsmanship, it is all nonsense. Wu Luding scolded, "You want to say your last words to me? I don't want to hear it." Wen Hua shook his head and said, "Why should I die? I still have to find a wife and have children. My brother failed to live up to expectations and gave birth to a nest of daughters who don't even have a handle in their pants. He still has to rely on me to carry on the family name. I'll go back to my hometown and open a small restaurant. I'm good at chopped onion noodles, but unfortunately, I don't think anyone in my family likes to eat noodles with pickled vegetables. It's so sour that your teeth will fall off. Only you, 6 Vats, are willing to eat it." Cui Hua, to be honest, 6 Vat is not bad. Don't despise him for not being as capable as you. Only a useless man is reliable. Also, don't come looking for me in the future. I'm embarrassed and can't afford to lose face. When my injuries are almost healed, you can find a place to put me down and go your separate ways. That's right, 6 Vat, I can't pay back the money I owed you in the capital, but no matter how you look at it, I'll still treat you as half a brother, so I won't be polite with you. Just treat it as a red packet from when I get married in the future." Wu Luding spat, but his eyes were a little bitter. Wen Hua stretched out his only arm and rubbed his face. Only then did he realize that his face was actually full of tears. He grinned and tried his best to shout towards the capital, "Little Nian, let's go our separate ways here. I didn't lose out in my life knowing you. In the future, if you dare to be useless and not have the potential to be #1 in the world, I won't recognize you as my brother anymore." Wen Hua chuckled with difficulty, "I'm just saying. How can I really not treat you as my brother?" Wen Hua stretched out his hand and waved, "Little Nian, take care." He, Wen Hua, was a nobody who was a prodigal in the mud. When he came to the Jianghu, he had wandered the world with his arms around little Nian's shoulders when he was in dire straits. He had been called young master by others, he had ridden that inferior horse and mule, he had mastered 2 swords, and he had taken his last breath of the Jianghu. He had never let his brothers down, so his life was worth it. Wen Hua was a little sleepy. He closed his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Because before he fell asleep, he remembered the crooked tune they had hummed together that year. The steamed bun was white, but it was not as white as Gu Liang's chest. The tip of the lotus was perky, but it was not as perky as a little girl's butt. Wen Hua did not know that in the capital, a person was running wildly on the Central Axis Road like a madman with a head full of white hair. He rushed up to the top of the city wall. "Wen Hua, F***CK your 18 generations of ancestors, who the F***CK allowed you to not practice the sword." He threw a sword out of the capital fiercely. "Forget it if you don't want it. I'll pretend that I don't have this sword." The white-haired man threw away the spring and autumn sword. He lowered his head, and his eyes were blurred with tears. His lips were trembling, and he was sobbing softly. "Who allowed you to not practice the sword? I won't allow it. We agreed that we would do it together so that no one would dare to look down on us brothers. Are you stupid? We used to work together to cheat people of their money. Don't you know how to pretend to kill me? So what if Su Fengnian stabbed you with a sword? That year, when didn't I pretend to be a villain and help you cheat those young ladies? You're allowed to be my brother, but I'm not allowed to be your brother? What kind of brother are you?" Su Fengnian's voice was hoarse. He cried and cried until he bent over. ###notice one. Today is a bumpy day. There is nothing scarier than going to the hospital to see a dentist. What's scarier is that you have to go again in half a month. Since I came back, I slept until now. Therefore, today's update is over. I have to go back to sleep. I've also used up the 4 days of leave for this month. I haven't counted the specific update numbers, but it's definitely at least 190,000 words. 2. There's still an hour and a half before August ends. The issue of the monthly tickets will be finalized in an hour and a half. I don't know if there will be any surprises. I only know that no one has dropped the ball this month. 3. There's still September after August. I hope it'll be another stable month. My goal is the same as August. I'll have 4 days of leave and at least 5,000 words per day. 4. The pre-sales of the physical books in Snow have exceeded everyone's expectations. It can only be described as a miracle. It's on Dangdang, Amazon, and Jingdong. I welcome everyone's support. 5. It's better to be happy together than alone. Today's dentist is a beauty. It's just that she's a bit cruel. 6. Go and rest. See you tomorrow. See you in September. #update notice plus seeking guaranteed monthly tickets at 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock in the evening. Last month, for some reason, I had 3 tickets in my account. At the beginning of the month, I gave myself a ticket to encourage myself. At the middle of the month, I gave it to a friend. There's no reason for it. At the end of the month, I gave myself another ticket to reward myself for not dropping the ball for the first time in the monthly ticket battle. In the monthly ticket battle in September, everyone will continue to not act until they see the hair. Of course, I still hope that the guaranteed monthly tickets will be cast in the next few days. Li Chungang wrote, "Sword, come on the snowfield." Even the loser had the courage to shout, "Ticket?" Chapter 738. As Li Dong approached, a strange old man appeared at the Zayamawi post house. His white eyebrows were long and slender like willows. Xianyuan Qingfeng only knew that this old man had barged into the courtyard a few days ago and had a few words with Su Fengyan. After that, he left the hospital and returned. These days, Su Fengyan had changed. He still ate, talked, and slept, but Xianyuan Qingfeng still felt that something was wrong. The snow gradually stopped. Youth Wu placed the snowman that had been moved to the corridor back into the courtyard. Today, the clouds parted and the world was suddenly illuminated. Su Fengyan was lying on a rattan chair. The white-browed ancestor of unknown identity was nowhere to be seen. The snowman stood under the dragon claw locust tree, and Su Fengyan stared at it in a daze. Xianyuan Qingfeng moved a rattan chair to the side, and after lying down, he rocked back and forth, babbling. When a woman stood up, she stuck out her chest, causing her twin peaks to rise. That was nothing, but when she lay down, it was especially spectacular, showing her true elegance. Xianyuan Qingfeng asked, "Who's that old man?" These days, Su Fengyan would answer every question. He didn't put on a stern face for anyone. Instead, his temper gradually improved. He only said that he would exchange arms with Li Chungang. Xianyuan Qingfeng began to stir up trouble again. "Isn't old sword godly half your master? Your enemy is right in front of you. Why don't you draw your sword?" Su Fengyan laughed softly. "One sword, one sword. Why would Li Chungang need others to avenge him? Besides, old Huang is his disciple." Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned. "The toothless Jianjiu Huang is this old man's disciple?" Su Fengyan nodded. Xianyuan Qingfeng hesitated for a moment. In the end, he still asked, "What happened?" Su Fengyan stared straight at the snowman. Just before Xianyuan Qingfeng's patience reached its limit, he said, "Xianyuan Qingfeng, your dream is to become a martial artist like Wang Xianji? To become the Empress of Liang Lake? But I know that this is something that happened after the Battle of Bulgang. What was your earlier dream?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "My father can walk into my mother's courtyard and drink the osmanthus wine together during the mid-autumn reunion." Su Fengyan returned the favor and said with a smile, "When I was young, my dream was to be a hero who punishes evil. It doesn't matter if I use a sword or a saber, but I must uphold justice. First, I must avenge my mother. Then, I will go to Jianghu and make a name for myself. It would be best if I could find a good woman like my mother in Jianghu." At that time, I didn't think about whether I would become the king of Bailiang in the future, because I never thought that Su Shao would grow old. Then he stretched out his finger and pointed at the snowman. "The dream is that little snowman. It can't be sold for money. Only children would treat it as a treasure and wouldn't trade it even if there were mountains of gold and silver. But at our age, most people don't like to talk about dreams anymore. They feel that it's pretentious and unrealistic. Take me for example. I don't have any hope in my dream of becoming a hero in Jianghu. You and I are just trying to cheat each other and trade with each other. In the future, those Jianghu people who rely on Bailiang will only be sold based on their abilities to get an official position. What I said on the Royal Road earlier isn't a dream, it's a responsibility. Your dream now isn't a dream either, it's an ambition. Among the people I know, only 2 people really have dreams, and they haven't changed after all these years. But our dreams, once the snowman melts under the sun, it's gone. Their dreams are that even if the snowman is gone this year, they will wait for the heavy snow next year to make another snowman, year after year. Xianyuan Qingfeng said with a smile, one of them is Jiang and I, who wants to kill you, and the other is Wenhua, who only wants to be a swordsman and be able to afford an iron sword. Su Fengnian nodded. That's right. When you grow up, you feel that your dreams are very childish. Those aren't dreams at all. Su Fengnian said calmly, Wenhua is a fool who values his dreams more than his life. It's because he has something valuable that I don't have that I admire him. Smart people like to laugh at others for not shedding tears until they see the coffin. Wenhua has always been that fool who is laughed at. When he was young, he carved bamboo swords, perhaps because he was laughed at by his family. When he grew up, he still carried a wooden sword, which was laughed at by his fellow villagers. After I met him, I also laughed at him every now and then for his one-track mind and that he deserved to be a good-for-nothing. After we separated, sometimes I thought of Wenhua. I felt that if this kid were to roam the Jianghu one day and was really killed, I would definitely avenge him and wipe out his enemies. This time, that when Bushing who appeared in the capital, I actually didn't want it to be Wenhua. It's not that I'm afraid that my brother will steal the limelight, but I also practice swordsmanship and martial arts. I know better than anyone what I want to gain and what I have to pay. I, Su Fengnian, am the heir of Bailiang. Many of the things that I have to pay may sound very frightening, but because of my strong family background, it's not like I won't be able to climb up in the future. But who is Wenhua? He's just an ordinary commoner. What can he pay other than his dreams that are more important than his life? Bailiang's foundation is already under the covetous eyes of Beimang in Ling. They can't afford to lose a single battle, let alone Wenhua. Xianyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, therefore, Wenhua is Wenbushing. Su Fengnian stood up and walked to the old locust tree to squat down. Su Fengnian followed behind him as if he was possessed by gods and gods. Reaching out, he dug out a handful of snow from the ground and piled it on top of the snowman. He lightly patted it a few times. Wenhua's 2 sword moves were taught by Huang Sanjia on his behalf. He is the great benefactor who made Wenhua's dreams come true. Huang Sanjia wanted him to kill me. If it were you who wanted to kill me, regardless of whether you succeeded or not, you would have a very high chance of escaping unscathed. Xianyuan Qingfeng, what would you do? Chapter 739. Ordinary women would find it extremely difficult to wear pure colored clothes. Black and white were fine, but red and purple were as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Xianyuan Qingfeng was able to subdue Zi, which showed how outstanding her appearance and temperament were. She thought for a moment and laughed. Nonsense, I'll definitely kill you without hesitation. Even if you sold me the Imperial Jade Seal and let me take advantage of you, if Huang Longsher stood in front of me today and said that he could help me become an Earth Immortal in a few years without any worries, I'd kill you without hesitation. At most, I'd leave your corpse intact for the sake of our old friendship. Su Fengnian laughed and raised his head. You and I still have old friendship to reminisce about? Xianyuan Qingfeng didn't sprinkle salt on his wound. However, it was more appropriate to describe the current situation as adding frost to snow. Su Fengnian kept adding snow to the snowman. For some reason, Xianyuan Qingfeng felt a surge of anger and kicked the snowman to pieces. Su Fengnian stood up. The old man who came to deliver the message that night was lying on his rattan chair. Xianyuan Qingfeng waved her hand, indicating for Su Fengnian to scram out of the courtyard. She then started building the snowman again. Su Fengnian lay on the chair next to the old man. One old and one young. There was a great difference in age between them, probably 4 or 5 generations. The old man's eyebrows fluttered in the wind as he placed a hand on his white eyebrows and slowly rubbed them. In my life, the only thing I like is swordsmanship, and I only ask the enemy's strongest sword. The Wu family's sword tomb boasted of being #1 in swordsmanship in the world, and I made the Su of Gojoseon unable to show his face. When Dong Tai was young, he struggled at death's door in Sword Mountain. I didn't teach this child any swordsmanship, only telling him to go get a sword if he didn't want to. But in the end, Dong Tai still chose to walk the path of swordsmanship. This is the stubbornness of his mother's womb, and I can't do anything about it. Below the demon-slaying platform on Mount Longhu, I went to ask Li Chungang about his sword Dao. Exchanging sword Dao was like exchanging an arm. We were enemies, but at the same time, we were half friends. My second disciple, who was your coachman in Bailiang Palace, Huang Jintu, who traveled with you, had extraordinary talent. Compared to my first disciple, it was like comparing their statuses. One was a blacksmith, and the other was the imperial uncle of West Shu. They were worlds apart. However, I valued Huang Jintu more because his sword was closer to the way. In fact, the eldest disciple defended the nation with his sword. Even before he died, he did not manage to deliver a decent strike. Instead, it was the second disciple, the 9th saber, whom you named 6,000 miles, who impressed me with his 9th strike. Lao Qianbei, Su Fengyan asked, Lao Qianbei, Lao Huang's 6 hidden swords, are they all for you? The old man was in a good mood. He nodded with a smile and said, this fool doesn't have the shackles of status. Therefore, no matter how he practices the sword, it's all about the word, love. The clumsy bird flies first. Instead, he's more promising than his senior brother. He visited Martial Emperor City twice. The first time, he wanted the world to know his master's name. The second time, he hoped that I, his master, would know that it's not shameful to have such a clumsy disciple. Su Fengyan said, what he practices is the sword, and what he's returning is kindness. The old man smiled and said, I've made 3 bets with Huang Longshi in my life. He bet that the consort of the king of Bailiang would enter the realm of Sword Immortal during the battle in the palace. He bet that Li Chungang, who was imprisoned in the tide-listening pavilion, would enter the realm of Earth Immortal. The third bet was that when Hua would not practice the sword. Finally, I won once at the last moment. Otherwise, I would also have the nickname of Sui Bushing. The old man didn't need to look at Su Fengyan. He went straight to the point and said, there's no need to waste your time thinking about who this old man surnamed Sui is. Even Huang Longshi doesn't know my real name. It's strange. I've made a few exchanges with Huang Longshi, but I still can't see what he wants. Back then, during the white clothes case in the capital, the Zhao family wanted to cut off the bloodline of the Su family. Yuan Benshi and the old emperor of the Zhao family were the masterminds. Yang Taisui could be considered half an accomplice. Huang Longshi bet that your mother, Wu Su, would enter the realm of Sword Immortal. He also used a famous sword in exchange for me to come out of seclusion, just in case, to protect the lives of the 2 of you. I divulged the heavenly secret not because I don't want you to bear a grudge against Huang Longshi. That old man should have died long ago. He's been fanning the flames everywhere. I just don't want him to die in the hands of small fries. The old man sighed deeply and said, in my opinion, there are only 2 types of moves in the world that are useful and good-looking. Li Xiaoxin's yellow river hanging above Dao's sex head belongs to the good-looking category. There's no other way. After all, he's still a member of the 3 sections. The Wu family's Su of Gojoseon's scattered stars in the sky is also good-looking but not useful. If you really want to explain it, it's like facing 10,000 enemies, killing 300 and injuring 600 with one sword move can't compare to killing 500 with one sword move. Li Chuangong's 2-sleeved green snake is a little different. It's good-looking and useful. Back then, when I asked Li Chungang about the 2-sleeved green snake, I didn't want to ask about the 2-sleeved green snake. However, Li Chuangong's state of mind was damaged and couldn't open the Heaven's Gate. But in terms of the power of the sword moves, the 2-sleeved green snake was still at its peak. Back then, when I asked and answered the sword, even if one of our arms was cut off, I still left in high spirits and returned in high spirits. There's no grudge to speak of. Su Fengyan asked curiously, Then Wang Xianji claims to be second in the world. The old man laughed and said, to be humble, even if Ancestor Lu's reincarnation, Dragon Tiger Qishuanjin, and Wudong's Hong Shixiang, they would only be evenly matched. Only Ancestor Lu, who passed through the Heaven's Gate 800 years ago, would have a 70% chance of winning. Su Fengnian kept his mouth shut. The old man said softly, in the martial world that we live in, there's no martial world where the more we mix, the more the tide will rise. The old man gently stretched out his hand, and the spring and autumn sword, which was thrown outside the city by Su Fengnian and kept in the imperial palace, flashed and instantly appeared in the old man's hand. Back then, I couldn't determine the victor between me and Li Chungang, and I've always had a knot in my heart. Since you have the quintessence of Li Chuangang's two swords, especially the one that opened the Heaven's Gate, I'll teach you a sword move. When we determine the victor in the future, go to Li Chuangang's grave and propose a toast. For this sword, I'll only take a scabbard. Keep the sword for me. I'm going to marshal Emperor City. When the spring and autumn sword returns to its scabbard is when I teach you that sword move. The old man threw the scabbard into the air and flew away on his sword. Clear laughter spread through Great Peace City. There are 3 million sword immortals in the sky, but they all have to bow before me. Chapter 740. Clouds hung low in the sky above the capital, a large expanse of gorgeous burning clouds. The woman's purple robes dragged across the snowy ground. In the end, she still piled up a crooked snowman. Su Fengnian lay on the rattan chair and asked with a smile, how many purple robes did you bring? Back in the day, when I listened to the old men in Tide Listening Pavilion talk about the legends of Jianghu, I was always curious about how those white-robed swordsmen dressed themselves. Last time I went to Beimang, at Tuma Pass, I saw one. Now I'm puzzled. In the future, when you walk the martial arts world, are you determined to only wear purple robes? But speaking of which, although there are many colors in the world, there are only so many pure colors. The green robes have Chao Changqing, and the white robes have Chen Zhibao. When it comes to a junior like you, there aren't many colors to choose from. Xianyuan Qingfeng seemed to be very satisfied with the little snowman. Smiling, he stood up and clapped his hands, restraining his smile. Don't you think about why that sword-eating old man surnamed Sui came to the Demoyai post house? Is he up to no good? Taking 10,000 steps back, Huang Longshi's kung fu is even above Chao Changqing's. Other than Wen Hua's broken sword, which wounds are more severe than sword strikes, does Huang Longshi really not have any other tricks up his sleeve? If you were to be killed in the capital, whether it's the Chuanqiu remnant rebels who hate the king of Bailiang or the hidden forces in Beimang, I'm sure they would all clap their hands and cheer. How could it be just a big white robe? Furthermore, I don't see you paying any attention to the Lidong Imperial Assembly or the coronation of a prince. These days, you've only been holed up in this post house. Don't you feel suffocated? Su Fengnian glanced at the pitiful snowman and sat up with a smile. Then let's go out for a walk? Su Shao mentioned some wonderful snacks. I also want to try them, but I don't think they're good enough for me. Even a seat would be dirty. Xianyuan Qingfeng wanted to retort, but he swallowed the words at the tip of his tongue and laughed softly. You and I aren't the same kind of people. Su Fengnian nodded and said, that's right. You should follow the restaurants and inns on the streets outside Ma Wei. The scholars of the capital are the same kind of people. Xianyuan Qingfeng couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him, but he remembered something. 2 days ago, this guy had suddenly become interested and wanted to go out to buy a rare type of yellow wine. It was still snowing heavily, and the courtyards and pavilions on both sides of the street had long been occupied by people from all walks of life in the capital. Xianyuan Qingfeng and Su Fengnian went out together. Other than Lu Wenbao, who continued to tremble under the dragon claw locust tree, there was a pair of old and young beggars further away from Ma Wei. When Xianyuan Qingfeng saw Su Fengnian walking towards them, he originally thought that Su Fengnian was putting on an act of tipping them. He didn't expect that Su Fengnian would only kick the old beggar, as if disdaining the old beggar for blocking his way. Xianyuan Qingfeng didn't think too much about it at the time, but after the two of them walked for a while, they saw many people running out of the buildings. Not only did they leave large amounts of silver behind, they also sent fox fur coats and food. The previously empty bowl was immediately filled with shining silver, and there were even a few banknotes. Later on, when the two of them returned from buying wine, they heard from Ma Wei-in's Tong Ziliang that the grandfather and grandson, who had been begging on the street for many years, had already been taken to a luxurious mansion with vermilion gates and high walls by a wealthy gentleman. He rewarded the old beggar with a carefree job, and that wealthy gentleman won the praise of nearly half of the capital on that day. Xianyuan Qingfeng couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He then looked at Su Fengnian, who had only lightly kicked him back then, and somewhat understood. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked on the road that had been swept clean of snow. Beggars from other places were squatting on both sides of the street. Most of them were young men who had nothing better to do. They could only stare at the heir of Bailiang, hating themselves for not daring to block his path and being kicked or slapped in the face. Xianyuan Qingfeng remembered when he watched his father brew wine when he was young. His father had once said, "The lantern of the whole family is bright and the moon of the poor family is bright." I have always been considered to be extremely insightful. The lantern of the whole family is bright, but the moon of the poor family is bright for 1,000 years. Only then can I see the true state of the world. Su Fengnian heard Xianyuan Qingfeng mumbling to himself. He asked, "What are you mumbling about?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, "I pity you." Su Fengnian laughed softly. "Do I need you to pity me?" At the corner of the street that led to Shima Wei, in the opposite direction of Su Fengnian and Xianyuan Qingfeng's group, there was a carriage parked there. The curtain was lifted, revealing a woman's appearance that could be described as peerless. The weight of these 4 words was clearly more important than the so-called beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. In terms of rouge, she did not lose to Nangong. Other than this beauty, there was also a mother and daughter who were far less beautiful than her. The daughter had freckles on the tip of her nose and did not hide her hostility towards her. The mother had a calm demeanor and was a model of motherhood. The average-looking woman said softly, "So you really have a head of white hair." There was a heavy snowfall in the capital region, which signaled a bountiful year. The faces of the people who entered and exited the city were filled with joy. Even the guards at the city gate, who had always been cautious and prudent as the first principle of official cultivation, had a joyous expression on their faces. Great Peace City accepted hundreds of rivers, and the guards at the city gate had seen many strange people. However, today, a man and a woman still made the guards take a few more glances at them. The girl's appearance was not that beautiful. The beauties in the capital were confusing, and she was at most an average person, which made it hard for people to remember her. However, the young monk beside the girl was not ordinary. His kasaya was dyed red and green, which was not commonly seen in the capital. One had to have great merit to be able to wear it. The little monk's lips were red and his teeth were white, which attracted a lot of attention along the way. Now that the imperial court was destroying Buddhism, monks were no different from street rats. However, the little monk's demeanor was calm. He approached the city gate and handed over 2 different residence certificates to the guards. The girl behind him tiptoed around and pinched a soft snowball that was not very sturdy. She jumped up and smashed it on his head. Many of the snowballs splashed into the collar of the kasaya. It was so cold that the little monk shivered and turned his head with a bitter expression. The girl made a face. After the guards took the residence certificate, they looked at the little monk and did not dare to act rashly. They quickly reported it to the guards at the city gate. After verifying that there were no mistakes, they sent the gift into the city. Oh my, this little monk was a proper preaching monk at the 2 Zen temples. He was also so young. Who knew if he would become Buddha in the future? Burning incense and praying to Bodhisattva was a matter of sincerity. The guards were all respectful and carefully escorted him. They all wanted to get more Buddha's aura so that they could bring it back to protect their families. Destroying Buddhism was the business of the imperial court officials. They were small fish and shrimp, and could not afford to offend the Bodhisattva. The little monk saw that the girl was going to pinch snowballs on the side of the road again and asked with a bitter expression, "You little thing, you've been smashing me since it started snowing. The snow has already stopped. Haven't you smashed enough?" "If it's enough, of course I won't smash you. Do you need to ask? Tell me, aren't you stupid? Stupid north and south?" The little monk hugged his head and let her smash it. Don't block it. After saying that, she went to pinch snowballs again. This time, she pinched 2 snowballs in one breath. Stupid North and South gathered his courage and said, I only have this one kasaya. If you dirty it and wash it, I won't be able to wear it for a few days. If you delay my preaching in the palace, I'll be really angry. I'll make you angry. I'll make you angry. With 2 smacking sounds, stupid North and South's bald head, who did not dare to block it with his hands, was hit by 2 more snowballs. Stupid North and South rubbed his bald head. When he saw her puffed-up cheeks, he thought carefully and said, I'm not angry. The girl looked at him seriously. It seemed that he was really not angry. This made her a little depressed. She ran to pinch snowballs again. She jumped up with a smile and smacked it again. Stupid North and South saw that she smiled for the first time since the old abbot passed away. She should really not be angry. Li Dong wiped his hands with his sleeves. These days, he had been playing crazily all the way here. He had been dealing with snow, so his hands were frozen red and swollen. He looked at the seemingly endless imperial road and sighed, How do you think we can find Su Fengnian? I heard from father that there are millions of people in the capital. Stupid North and South smiled brightly and said, When we enter the palace, I'll help you ask. Can you do it? Yes. If you can't find him, do you believe that I'll let you start rolling a snowball from the gate behind us all the way to the gate on the other side? I can agree, but I don't know martial arts. I can't roll such a big snowball. You're so stupid. Can you be the abbot of our temple? Sigh, I'm also worried. Look, it's the rouge shop. I'm worried. Stupid North and South. Turn your head and say, What are you worried about? I'll make you worry. Stand still and don't move. I'll smack you to death. Li Dong, look, the rouge shop is closing. Ah, hurry. Chapter 741. Su Fengnian's group walked quietly in the small alley. Icicles hung from the eaves of the houses. Wu broke 2 of them and held them in his hand, jumping up and down to play with them. They passed by a small courtyard with 2 entrances. Coincidentally, the door was not closed. Perhaps the children in the courtyard were still playing outside and had not yet returned home to eat. Looking around, there was a red copper pot on the square table in the room. The charcoal fire burned brightly and smoke curled up. Because it was a small family in a small courtyard, there were not many variations to the mutton pot. It was enough to get rid of the wind and cold. It could not compare to the variety of dishes that could be used in large houses. Wu listened to the sound of the charcoal crackling and the water boiling. He sniffled. It was so fragrant. There were too many families in Great Peace City that had fallen from grace. These people had left and never returned, but they were still picky. This caused the capital to have too many rules. They did not eat from time to time and did not overstep the rules. They were very particular about what they ate. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I know a good place to eat mutton in Dragon Whisker Ditch. Let's go try it? Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned and said, I don't eat mutton. It smells disgusting. Su Fengnian shook his head and said with a smile, That's because you haven't eaten good mutton. The good mutton in Great Peace City is all black-headed white sheep from the mountains. The meat used is from the back of the sheep's neck. A sheep can't produce more than a few tails of this meat. It's not fishy, not smelly, and not greasy. Even if you have the money, you can't buy it in Mount Hui. Even worse is the meat from the tip of the sheep's buttocks. The next few mutton dishes are called big and small cucumber strips. They can't be eaten by particular people. The restaurant we went to only serves the first 2 dishes. It said that the chef can cut a caddy of meat into 81 slices, so the restaurant is called Jiujio Restaurant. Everything is authentic, but it's a bit expensive. There might not be a seat for us at the restaurant. The group walked to the side of the bridge that suppressed the water veins in the capital. They walked along the river and asked for directions from a few elderly citizens of the capital. The restaurant wasn't hidden deep, and the street outside the door was spacious. There were many luxurious carriages parked there. Just by looking at this, it didn't look like a restaurant that served mutton hot pot, but more like a brothel where people threw money away. Su Fengnian raised his head and looked. The 3 words on the signboard of Jiujio Restaurant were written by this old man Song himself. The restaurant wasn't big and only had one floor. It probably only had a dozen seats. Su Fengnian hesitated whether or not to go in. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was disgusted with mutton, actually walked in. Su Fengnian thought to himself, what a wicked woman who wants the world to be in chaos. Does she want me to compete with the local officials and dignitaries in the capital so badly? The four of them entered the Jiuzhou embassy. Bluebird and Wu both looked like proper people, but Su Fengnian and Xianyuan Qingfeng were very eye-catching. This was especially true for the purple-clothed Mount Huishan mountain chieftain. Even Su Xiao said that she did indeed have a bit of the charm of a genuine imperial concubine in the palace. The moment she entered, although she merely looked around, everyone could clearly sense her arrogance. Xianyuan Qingfeng set his sights on an empty table in the corner. Ignoring the ivory bone fan on the table, he walked over and sat down. With a wave of his sleeve, he swept that elegant fan, which was worth quite a lot of gold and silver, to the ground. Wu wanted to let Bluebird sit with the young master on the bench, so he wanted to sit next to Xianyuan Qingfeng. However, after being coldly glanced at from the corner of his eyes, he could only obediently sit across from Xianyuan Qingfeng. Back then, when he and Bluebird encircled and suppressed Han Diaoxi together, this fearless young death warrior had suffered quite a lot. Su Fengnian originally wanted to squeeze with Wu and Bluebird on the same bench, but Bluebird purposely didn't leave a seat for him with a smirk. Su Fengnian could only brace himself and let Xianyuan Qingfeng sit closer to the wall. With her bad temper that was spoiled by Xianyuan Jingqing, she could only show some restraint and reverence towards Su Xiao. Towards Su Fengnian, she had never treated him nicely. His words went in one ear and out the other, so she remained seated in the middle of the bench, not moving an inch. Su Fengnian sat down sideways. The small restaurant was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, and there were no ordinary people coming in and out. There was an old man in his 60s who had the air of an official, as if his master had brought some hard-pressed students to improve the food. There were also young men who practically had the words imperial relatives written on a piece of paper and pasted on their foreheads. The women around them were of various sizes, and their accessories were all very presentable. If any of the accessories on the beauties were pawned, a small family wouldn't have to worry about having a good meal for a few years. There were also some strong men with a strong aura of Jianghu who called out to their friends. Xianyuan Qingfeng was being unreasonable, so Su Fengnian had no choice but to mend the pen for her. Before the waiter of the Jiuzhou restaurant got angry, he picked up the ivory fan and found that there was a hollow ivory ball with balls hidden inside the ball. Su Fengnian shook it lightly and squinted his eyes to look at it. There were actually as many as 19 balls inside the ball. This kind of thought and craftsmanship could be said to be top-notch. Even though Su Fengnian was experienced and knowledgeable, he couldn't help but take a closer look. The waiter in the restaurant was a young lad who was full of youthful vigor and vigor. In addition, the Jiuzhou restaurant had seen many big shots in the capital, so it was inevitable that he had high standards. Although the man and woman in front of him didn't seem like common people, he couldn't lose his prestige in his own territory. Therefore, there was a bit of anger in his words. I say, what's going on with you guys? Don't you know about first come, first served? I don't care who you are, but if you want to eat our restaurant's instant boiled mutton, you have to wait outside obediently. As the waiter of the restaurant spoke, he glanced at the purple-clothed woman from time to time. The reason why he spoke so loudly was nothing more than a petty scheme to attract her attention. Xianyuan Qingfeng turned her head and stretched out 2 fingers to point at the waiter's eyes. Su Fengnian calmly pressed down her hand and smiled apologetically at the waiter. We were in the wrong for taking the seat later on. When the owner of the fan arrives, I will naturally let them know. If they are unwilling to bend the rules, then we will go outside and wait obediently. The weather is cold right now, so just treat it as us borrowing your precious place to warm our bodies. My little sister has a bad temper, so don't lower yourself to her level. The young lad Wu turned his head and held back his laughter with difficulty. His young master really didn't suffer any losses no matter where he went. Didn't he just become the older brother of the female owner of Big Bull Gang? Chapter 742. Scram to the side. Xianyuan Qingfeng lightly lifted her foot from under the table. Her gaze was like a knife cutting at the son of a Jingdo family who was flaunting their family background. When she opened her mouth, she scared all the diners. The powerful guests of the Jianghu were especially impressed. They thought that this little girl whose cultivation they couldn't see through was definitely a dragon among men. The Jianghu had lowered its head to the court for many years. To dare to coldly oppose the son of a minister in Great Peace City, she was most likely not a pure person of the Jianghu. Was she also a descendant of a powerful official? When Wang Xionggui's most useless son heard this, he laughed loudly and straightened his back. He spun the ivory-embroidered ball in his hand and smiled. He wasn't angry at all. As long as a woman was beautiful, even if she was a bit fierce and arrogant, she would have her own style. He, Wang Yuanran, was merciless when dealing with the sons of aristocratic families whose families were a level lower than his. He knew which people of the same age in Jingdo he should not provoke, who he should greet with a smile, and who he should pretend to be a grandson. There were millions of people in Great Peace City, but on the surface, there were only a few thousand people. Throwing away the old man who had retired and his father, who was a pillar of the court who was on par with him, the remaining 100 or so sons of aristocratic families could make him feel fear. Most of them were very familiar with him, and he really didn't recognize the young man and woman in front of him. He smiled confidently and calmly. He glanced at the purple-clothed woman's chest. She had hidden it deeply. He then looked down at the man who was groveling and tying her skirt. Brother and sister? Are you trying to fool me? Wang Yuanran sneered in his heart. Do you think that just because you're old, you're the Bailiang heir who doesn't kneel when he goes to court with a sword? Su Fengnian smiled and said, All right, the deal is done. The eyes in exchange for the embroidered ball, no matter how you look at it, Minister Wang's son, you've profited. If you don't leave now, I can't guarantee that you won't walk out horizontally. Wang Xiongui became an official during the reign of Yong Hui and impeached Su Shao 12 times. Every debt has its debtor. I'm not like some people in Jingdo who won't settle this old debt with a son like you. You're not worthy. No matter how hot the mutton pot was in Jiujiu restaurant, after these words entered the ears, it became exceptionally cold outside the restaurant. That morning, the old man was a fifth-rank official in the Ministry of Personnel. His position was at the back, and he did not get the chance to witness the arrogance of the Crown Prince of Northern Liang. Later on, when the Crown Prince of Northern Liang confronted tens of thousands of people from the Imperial College alone, the old man went to the memorial arch to join in the fun. From afar, he saw the bad behavior of the young man in white robes. Together with his colleagues, he lamented that the Northern Liang was indeed full of evil people. He was only 20 years old and had yet to inherit the position of Crown Prince of Northern Liang, yet he was already so rebellious. When he became the Crown Prince of Northern Liang in the future, could they really count on such a boastful brat to guard the northwest gate of the imperial court, which was an important border area? Wang Yuanran was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He raised his finger and laughed angrily. Brat, do you really think you are the Northern Liang prince? Even if you are, do you dare to bite me? Su Fengnian stretched out his arm, his 5 fingers forming a hook, and pulled Wang Yuanran towards the table. Su Fengnian pressed the back of Wang Yuanran's head and slammed it against the table, creating a hole in the head of the minister's youngest son. Wang Yuanran fell straight to the ground and fainted. Those henchmen were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear, their legs trembling. As the son of a famous family in the capital, under the premise that victory was in their grasp, it was okay to step on them a few times and slap them a few times, but if they really rolled up their sleeves and fought, it would be too degrading. What they did was honorable, but after the other people knelt down and begged for mercy, they spat their saliva into bowls and plates for them to drink. There were also ruthless people who peed on others, but they were all the descendants of their fathers. This brother in front of them couldn't be the Bailiang barbarian, could he? Su Fengnian curled his lips at the young man. Throw them all out. The young man of sacrifice suddenly stood up, grabbed one of them like a chicken and threw him out of the door. But before the first wave subsided, another wave arose. He was thrown back into the restaurant by Wang Yuanran's henchmen. He bumped into his friends and fell to the ground. He was probably so scared that he forgot to cry for his father and mother. Su Fengnian turned his head and narrowed his eyes. One of the real masters of the capital had arrived. The Zhao family already had the world, so naturally, they also had the capital. Among the 5 or 6 people who stepped into the restaurant, 2 of them had the surname Zhao. Princess Sui Zhu, Zhao Fengya, a tall and strong man, stepped into the Jiujiu restaurant before her. He was the first prince, Zhao Wu, who had been regarded as the next emperor of the Zhao family for many years. Zhao Fengya was gloating, while Zhao Wu's face was gloomy. Among the 3 people behind him, one of them was a woman who was far more beautiful than 91. There were also 2 retainers from the inner palace. They walked steadily and wore golden sabers with yellow silk around their waists. A certain doctor from the Ministry of Personnel, who had already been blinded once, was shocked. This time, he didn't dare to be blinded. He was about to kneel to welcome the prince and princess when Zhao Wu, who was known for his heroic spirit and the spirit of the late emperor, frowned and waved his hand to stop the old man from making a big fuss. The doctor from the Ministry of Personnel hurriedly left the restaurant with his favorite student. Jianghu people didn't dare to stay in a place of trouble for long. They put down the silver and ran away without caring about the change. Wang Yuanran fainted, and the henchmen suffered a great deal. The ugly man looked in the mirror and scared himself. He didn't dare to make a sound and just knelt there to beg for forgiveness. Zhao Wu picked a stool and sat down. He didn't look at Su Fengyan and sneered, "Wild dogs have no manners. They pee everywhere and don't look at where they are." Chapter 743. Su Fengyan turned around and gestured to the waiter to place the dishes on the table. Then he laughed softly and said, "The dog is at the door, but it barks eagerly. It barks a few times when it sees people. Isn't it afraid of being knocked down by a brick? It's winter in the capital, and it's really nice to eat a meal of local dog meat." Princess Sui Zhu lowered her head. She looked like a lady from a noble family and was unparalleled in elegance, but in reality, her face was full of smiles. She covered her stomach with one hand. Her stomach was hurting from laughing so hard. The woman who had been described in the New Rouge reviews as having a beauty that made all the women in the world avoid, quietly frowned when she heard the 2 men's vulgar and mean words. The 2 retainers with golden swords were naturally comparable to ordinary servants from noble families. They held their breath and stood with their hands on their swords. They just quietly guarded the door of the restaurant and turned a deaf ear to the quarrel in the small restaurant. The great Prince Zhao Yi said calmly, "You're only worthy of being bitten by a watchdog like Wang Yuanran. How promising." The waiter of the Jiujiu restaurant didn't dare to show his face. The owner of the restaurant was a middle-aged woman. It was unknown which family raised a canary, but she wasn't afraid in the face of such a storm. She walked out with a charming smile and placed the copper pot on the table with both hands. Then she deftly brought 3 plates of fresh and tender mutton slices with marbled patterns, sesame seed cakes, pickled cabbage, white skin sugar, garlic, and other exquisite snacks. In addition, there were 7 or 8 bowls and plates with smoked vinegar from Qingshu, dried soy sauce, freshly fried chili, chives, flowers, and so on. Red, green, yellow, blue, and white, plate after plate, bowl after bowl, refreshing and refreshing. Just looking at it made one's appetite soar. She told Zhao Yi's table to wait for a moment, and then she went to the curtained door and stood at the door, swaying gracefully. She made it clear that she wasn't going to miss the fierce battle between the local dragon and the river python. Not to mention small fish and shrimp, even large fish that weighed a few hundred caddies would have to obediently be steamed and braised in the pot if they thought they could overturn the river and sea. Xinyu said, "You guys go out first." Those helpers felt as if they had been pardoned and were moved to tears, but they still didn't dare to move. They were afraid that this fairy would go back on her word and add to their crimes. If that happened, their parents would peel their skin and pull out their tendons when they returned home. Prince Zhao Wu waved his hand with a straight face. The helpers ran away quickly and left Wang Yuanran on the cold ground without looking back. The words, sharing weal and woe together, were not something that could be exchanged with a few words or a bowl of chicken blood. Zhao Yi's words were earth-shattering. "I heard that you personally intercepted and killed Zhao Kai at the Iron Gate Pass. Although I don't like this brother of unknown origin, his surname is Zhao after all." Hearing this, the lady boss, who was even more charming than a young woman, sighed and went back into the room, pulling down the curtain. This was no longer a secret that she could hear. Even if her backer was very big, so big that it was beyond the imagination of rich children like Wang Yuanran, who in the world didn't live under the Zhao family's roof. If you didn't see the big picture, you wouldn't be able to survive in the capital. However, this was the first time that she had seen the first prince, who had been secretly sent to the border to gain experience since childhood. In the past, she had often heard that every time he broke through the enemy lines, he would always take the lead. If it weren't for his status as a prince, he would have accumulated enough military merits to be a commander of 3,000 soldiers. His speech and behavior were heroic and heroic. This time, seeing was believing. He was a straightforward man. Su Fengnian turned around. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Zhao Wu laughed. Surnamed Su, you dare to do it but don't dare to admit it? Su Fengnian also laughed. I can't say for other things, but beating a dog, I dare to do it and dare to admit it. Zhao Wu nodded. If a wild dog can pee on my feet, it can be considered a skill. I'm just afraid that its mouth will be full of feces and it won't bite. Su Fengnian slowly stood up. Zhao Wu clicked his tongue. Just you? Don't you want to call others to do it for you? When the time comes, don't give yourself a way out by saying that you didn't eat and your hands and feet are weak. A golden saber imperial bodyguard took 3 steps forward and unsheathed his saber by a few inches. Su Fengnian continued to move forward. The imperial bodyguard took a step forward and quickly unsheathed his saber. The saber flashed. But in the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian was standing in front of him. With one hand on the hilt, he put the saber back into the scabbard. The imperial bodyguard, whose strength was close to second rank, had a cold look in his eyes. He raised his knee and knocked. Su Fengnian's left hand let go of the saber's hilt and gently pushed. The imperial bodyguard's knee missed. In his shock, Su Fengnian smashed out with a spinning kick. The imperial bodyguard couldn't care less about the fact that he couldn't take advantage of Su Fengnian and hastily pulled out his saber. His body fell backward and he slapped the ground with one hand. Just as he was about to stand up, Su Fengnian took advantage of the situation and slammed his palm on the top of his head. The imperial bodyguard was directly smashed into the ground. He spat out blood and struggled to stand up. Without the false mysterious finger's internal energy and the false celestial phenomenon, Su Fengnian had already witnessed the magnificence of the long scroll. Even if it was just a pitifully rare treasure, it was still far from what an imperial bodyguard who wasn't even second rank could challenge. Another golden saber imperial bodyguard leaped over his colleague's body and raised his saber to chop down on his head. During the fierce battle with the blind zither player in the rainy alley, there was once the 18 strokes of the Hujia. Su Fengnian leaned sideways and slapped the saber 6 times in a row. The saber's momentum was completely gone. He waved his sleeve and threw the imperial bodyguard to the wall. Then, he rode his sword and nailed Huang Tong and Qing Mei to the wall. The remaining 10 swords pierced through in an instant. After the imperial bodyguard fell on the table, there were 12 shocking pools of blood on the wall. Su Fengnian turned around and grabbed the first Prince Zhao Wu's neck. He lowered his head and laughed sinisterly. Zhao Wu, other than your surname, what do you have to compete with me? Su Fengnian pushed back and knocked Qin Yu to the ground. This crown prince of Bailiang actually pinned the first prince of Liyang to the wall and made him unable to breathe. Su Fengnian asked word by word, so what if your surname is Zhao? Chapter 744. Su Fengnian. A woman at the door called out softly. Her appearance was average, but she was imposing without being angry. Beside her stood a young man who looked somewhat similar to the first prince Zhao Wu. However, compared to Zhao Wu's boorish aura, this young man had a more reserved and refined aura. At first glance, one could tell that he was an expert in jade cultivation. After being humiliated, the boorish man Zhao Wu, who should have been angry out of humiliation, gave a fleeting smile. Only Su Fengnian was sharp enough to notice it. Perhaps even the woman, who was focused on the crown prince of Bailiang, did not notice it. Su Fengnian had wanted to fish out Han Diaoxi, who was hiding his head and tail, but he did not expect that it was Empress Zhao Ji and the 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan who surfaced. He smiled and slowly let go of Zhao Wu's neck. He turned around and bowed slightly. His tone was respectful, but his address was extremely disrespectful. Nephew greets Aunt Zhao. Zhao Zi's expression was complicated. The guilt that she had suppressed deep in her heart floated to the surface. She said coldly, "This is the first time you have addressed me like this, and it will also be the last time. Take care of yourself." The previous generation of the Su family and the Zhao family had already cut off all ties. Zhao Zi, who originally still had a trace of sympathy for the Su family, had completely extinguished the flickering incense. She suddenly turned around and saw the gloomy white-haired man smiling like a spring breeze. This made Zhao Zi's heart fill with an unknown haze. She was not afraid that this young man would become the second Su Xiao. Su Xiao's rise to power was due to the spring and autumn period and the 6 kingdoms under his horse's hooves. It would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for his descendants to rely on military exploits. Zhao Zi was not afraid that he would follow the woman's upright character. She was only afraid that he would not care about anything and would bite people like a crazy wild dog. Zhao Zhuan helped 2 golden-sabred imperial bodyguards up. The 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan walked forward and helped one of them who was less injured. The imperial bodyguard was immediately filled with gratitude. The 2 princes, who shared the same father and mother, quietly looked at each other and smiled. Zhao Wu even turned his head and grinned. He made a bloody gesture of cutting his neck with a knife at the crown prince of Bailiang. Zhao Zhuan gently pressed down Zhao Wu's hand and smiled apologetically at Su Fengyan. Princess Sui Zhu and Zhao Fengya lowered their heads. Her expression could not be seen clearly. Chen Yu, who had fallen, was still calm and collected. She was also very calm. The 3 women sat in the carriage. The 1st Prince Zhao Wu and the 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan rode their horses to escort them. Such a caravan was truly shocking. Princess Sui Zhu's eyes were full of smiles, but she scolded, "What a boorish man." Zhao Zi shook her head and said, "The ladder was put up by your 4th brother. Su Fengyan is also smart." As a result, both families walked down the ladder. Zhao Fengya was confused and said, "I don't understand." Zhao Zi lifted the curtain and glared at her son, Zhao Zhuan, who thought he was smart. The latter smiled mischievously and made a face. Zhao Zi said calmly, "Su Fengyan used this opportunity to tell our Zhao family that the Su family will only guard the country for the people of Liyang in the future. It has nothing to do with the Zhao family." Zhao Fengya said angrily, "He's too bold." Zhao Fengya was still angry. She snorted and then laughed to herself, almost crying. "Mother, if only I had Li Chuangong's ability. I would learn from the old god of swords and go to Bailiang and shout, 'Money, come, horse, come,' and knife a few times. Whoosh, 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 Su Fengyan's family wealth is all gone. Or I could learn from the white-robed monk and hang a yellow river over his head and drown him with a splash." Zhao Zi touched her daughter's head lovingly. "Childish. You're still young." Zhao Fengya asked curiously, "Who's the proprietress?" "The last time I came here to eat mutton with Uncle Su, we also talked and laughed." Zhao Zi's face was covered with a faint layer of melancholy. She shook her head and said, "An old account book that can't be calculated clearly." Zhao Fengya threw herself into the arms of the current empress and laughed in a low voice. "Mother, tell me everything. You're only a few years younger than Uncle Su. Did you have a crush on Uncle Su back then?" Zhao Zi was stunned. She twisted her daughter's ear and said, "Lawless. I should marry you off as soon as possible." Chen Yu, who was clearly estranged from the mother and daughter pair, didn't say a word. She didn't ask, didn't listen, and didn't speak. Some places were at daggers drawn. Some places were happy and harmonious. Longhu and Wudong had been fighting for the ancestral court of Taoism for hundreds of years. Perhaps many people had forgotten that 120 years ago, there was a young Taoist priest who looked like a wild fox that drew a talisman dragon in Tai and City. It was rumored that after adding the finishing touch, he would fly into the clouds. This rootless duckweed summoned wind and thunder, overthrew ghosts, and suppressed Longhu and Wudong with his own strength. He was highly regarded by the Emperor of Liyang at that time and was conferred the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Fu Hua. He was in charge of the talismans of the three mountains and was in charge of the affairs of Taoism. He prayed for snow and rain, and all of them came true. In the hands of the late Emperor of Liang, he was given the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Mingcheng. After the current emperor ascended to the throne, he was given the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Mingcheng. However, after 60 years, the place where this immortal who had the same surname as the emperor cultivated declined day by day. There was not a single incense stick in the incense burner. There were green pines and cypresses, which were especially green in the winter. However, there was no immortal aura. Instead, it seemed gloomy. There was a small table under an old cypress tree. 2 people were drinking with 5 maidservants standing behind them. One was a plump maidservant warming the wine, while the other was a thin maidservant brewing tea. The wine pot and teapot were placed on the table with a clear distinction. The person drinking had a withered and solemn face. He looked to be about 40 years old. Probably because of his poor complexion, the twilight was gloomy. Tea drinkers were much more elegant and elegant. Even in the capital where good and bad mixed together, it was rare to see such an outstanding man with such an extraordinary temperament at first glance. He was even more meticulous than a woman in taking care of himself. 67 Yuan Binshi. 64 Nalan Yusi. Everyone knew that Nalan Yusi had 5 personal maidservants. In Fengdu, there were 3 corpses in Dongyue and Shishu. Their nickname was derived from their aura. The maidservants who brewed tea were the 3 corpses, and the maidservants who warmed wine were the 3 corpses. Nalan Yusi laid on the sandalwood couch and scooped some spices. He smiled and asked, Yuan Benshi, are you really going to cultivate Jean Lanting, that white-eyed wolf, as the second blue-eyed boy? Be careful not to lose everything. Although I haven't heard or seen it with my own eyes, I heard from other people that he doesn't seem like a talent that you can entrust with such a big task. He's too full to be a minister. He's poor to the bone. Yan Qing is not a good thing. If you let him assist you in governing the country, aren't you afraid that you'll lose everything after working hard for a lifetime? Yuan Benshi said vaguely, I'll take care of the matters in the capital. You don't have to worry about it. Nalan Yusi took over a black glazed teacup. He swirled the cup with his finger and smelled the refreshing fragrance. It was as if the fragrance of the tea could intoxicate people. He squinted his eyes and said, I think Lu Su, the strategist under King of Jing and Zhao Sun, is not bad. Don't you want to poach him? Without the young blind man's assistance, won't Xiangfan, which controls the waste of the Central Plains, be in your hands? Lu Su can also take over the mantle of your traversing technique. Yuan Benshi was expressionless as he drank slowly. Nalan Yusi slapped his forehead. It was not only self-deprecating but also laughing at others. He raised his eyes and looked at the courtyard. I almost forgot. You, Yuan Benshi, have no children. You're no different from a eunuch. Moreover, you don't make enemies or friends. This is to let the Zhao family rest assured. If you have an heir, it will be the day when you, Yuan Benshi, will be killed. In this case, you should really envy me. Yuan Benshi glanced at the man standing behind the king of Yanqi. Nalan Yusi laughed. Is Lu Su really a chess piece of Huang Longshi? Is Qin Yu, who has a noble and honorable life? Yuan Benshi raised his head and drank a cup of wine. Chapter 745. Nalan Yusi knew this person's temperament, so he was too lazy to get to the bottom of it. He changed the question, you didn't catch Huang Longshi in your courtyard? Yuan Benshi shook his head. Nalan Yusi was a little cold. He raised his hand, and the servant girl Fengdu bent down, gently held her master's white jade-like hand, and put it between her warm breasts. Nalan Yusi lazily said, It's funny when I think about it. You, Yuan Benshi, single-handedly planned the white clothes case in the capital and persuaded Zhao Zhizhao to be the prince consort. You just want Bailiang to die. Now, Bailiang's heir finally came to the capital, but he can't be killed in the capital. He has to be protected like his own son. Even Han Diaosi doesn't allow him to enter the capital to make trouble. He can only kill him 500 miles away from the capital. Yuan Benshi cut off half an inch of his tongue in the past, so he couldn't speak clearly. Su Fengnian defeated Chen Jibao, so I lost to Bailiang. Just take it as a toast to Li Yishan. Nalan Yusi smiled sincerely. You are better than me in this aspect. You admit defeat. I don't have this kind of tolerance. Otherwise, I can still be friends with Xie. After he died, don't talk about toasting, I can't wait to dig his grave. I heard that he still has descendants who don't follow his surname. I dug 3 feet into the ground to look for them for many years, but there was no news. Thanks to the Rouge Review, I know that his name is Nangong Push. Yuan Benshi raised his arm and stopped drinking. He was in a trance and didn't pay attention to this. Naylan Yusi chuckled softly. According to the law of the feudal lord, he needs to observe filial piety for 3 years. I guess before Su Shao died, he will provoke the border and fight a war with Beimang, so that his eldest son can be crowned as the king smoothly. Yuan Benshi, I advise you to make your move as soon as possible and take drastic measures to disrupt Li Yishan's plans before his death. Yuan Benshi concluded, do you know why you can't compare to Li Yishan? Naylan Yusi said calmly, I know. Huang Longsher scolded me for only being able to gain and lose for 10 years. You are half mute and I am half blind. Yuan Benshi laughed it off. Naylan Yusi frowned his willowy eyebrows that were like a gentle woman's. That kid really went to Beimang alone and killed Su Huainan and the 5th raccoon, who was at the peak of his martial strength? Yuan Benshi nodded. Naylan Yusi clicked his tongue and said, then aren't you afraid? Yuan Benshi shook his head and said, unless he can destroy Beimang, he won't be able to use the Zhao family to kill me. Naylan Yusi smiled and said, if that's the case, it's a profit for you to exchange your life for a Bailiang or a Beimang. Then Chen Zhibao, aren't you worried about raising a tiger? It's no longer the spring and autumn period, a boorish man can't accomplish anything. The world is not in chaos, Shu is in chaos, the world has been pacified, but Shu is not pacified. Occupying Shu is the same as sitting on Bailiang, there is no hope of annexing the world. Yuan Benshi, I have to remind you that this is the experience of my generation of scholars. In the spring and autumn period, who would have thought that a young general with the strength of grade 2 could become a butcher? It's not the same. Naylan Yusi sighed, looked at the sky, and murmured, love can kill, not only men and women infatuated. It is said that Li Mixi of Beimang has a cage with butterflies. We are all butterflies in the cage, only Huang Longsher is detached from the world. Yuan Benshi, have you ever thought about what he wants? Yuan Benshi stood up. The 3 immortals in life are to establish words, merit, and virtue. 3 great traditions in one life, loyalty, literature, and quality. I'm afraid that it will take hundreds or even thousands of years to conclude Huang Longsher's coffin. Naylan Yusi did not respectfully send Yuan Benshi off, but sat on the small couch. It's best if Huang Longsher dies in our hands, then I die in the hands of Xie family's son, and you die in the hands of Su Fengnian, then the world will be peaceful. Yuan Benshi suddenly turned around and laughed. Isn't it more interesting to die in the hands of Su Fengnian? Naylan Yusi laughed and scolded, bad luck? When Yuan Benshi walked out of the abandoned Taoist temple, Naylan Yusi thought for a moment, dipped his finger in the tea, and wrote 2 words on the table. Emperor. Sitting back at the table, Xinyuan Qingfeng sneered, who told you to act on impulse? Were you framed by 1st Prince Zhao Zhuan, or tricked by 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan? Su Fengnian said calmly, it's most likely the 4th Prince of Zhao family. Although Zhao Wu deliberately hid his skills, he shouldn't be so scheming. I heard that the Crown Prince is one of them. Then you're destined to offend the future Emperor of Liang? That's right. Oh, even the Empress is really angry, but you don't look worried at all. Are you faking it? I said I'm faking it, okay? That woman is Qin Yu on the Rouge ranking, right? Is she going to be the 1st Prince's wife, or the new Empress in the palace? Not interested to know. I see that your relationship with her is not simple. I'm just guessing. My intuition has always been very accurate. Su Fengnian boiled a few pieces of mutton in the pot, and put them into the bowls of Bluebird and Wu respectively. Xinyuan Qingfeng was the most eccentric woman Su Fengnian had ever seen who could change so much after reaching the age of 20. She had the spoiled air of a romantic woman, the evil air of a broken family, and the righteous air of a woman with a great family. 80 wen, 85 wen, 90 wen. Looking at Xinyuan Qingfeng, Su Fengnian often thought of the man who became a saint on the great snow plains. Su Fengnian had always been biased against scholars. The poor scholar Chen Shiliang he met on his second trip was an exception, and Xianyuan Jingqing was even more so. Of course, Su Fengnian didn't have any superfluous thoughts about Xianyuan Qingfeng. It was just that he couldn't tell whether it was because of the honor and mutual benefit, or because they were both in the same predicament and had no way out. Towards the arrogant Xianyuan Qingfeng, he always had some tolerance that was beyond normal standards. Since the ancient times, the court and Jianghu were places where men fought for fame and fortune, and women were caught in the crossfire. Su Fengnian would always unknowingly pay more attention to those women who had wandered but were still stubborn. This was the case for Miss Su at Tuma Pass, and also for Miss Qingzhu, a wine seller whose daughter had died early in Beimeng. Su Fengnian seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and shouted toward the room with the hanging curtain, "Aunt Hong. No one is an elder like you." The woman pretended to spit. "Bah, you little brat, you just called that woman Aunt Zhao. How can I be called Aunt? Be careful not to shorten my life. Come, let me take a closer look. Tihitiske, you really do look like Wu Su. Luckily, you're not as crude as Su Xiao. Otherwise, which family's daughter would be blind to be your wife? I've been worried sick all these years. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to find a wife. Aunt Hong, this is the first time we meet, and you're already so sarcastic? I'm not paying back the money Su Xiao owes you for those meals. Call me aunt if you want. I'm already so old anyway. I'm not afraid of being called old by you. What money? Auntie Hong is not your heartless Auntie Zhao. She is very protective of her children, just like an old hen. As long as they enter the house, she will peck at anyone she sees. She doesn't care about friendship at all. Back then your mother, her, and I called each other sisters. She was the shrewdest and most calculating. What a pity. The little sisterhood we had back then was squandered away by the righteousness of 2 generations of men like you." The woman and Su Fengnian squeezed onto a bench. Xianyuan Qingfeng silently leaned against the wall and saw from the corner of his eye that the woman didn't forget to pinch Su Fengnian's cheeks as she spoke. It could be said that she loved him so much that she couldn't part with him. However, he couldn't stop her. Such an interesting scene was truly hard to come by in 100 years. The woman rubbed Su Fengnian's white hair and gently said, "I've wronged you all these years." Su Fengnian pursed his lips and shook his head. Chapter 746. This chapter is a bit short. It was the last Lidong before Li Yang changed the name of the year. A snowfall signaled a bumper year. This winter, the wheat would be covered with 3 layers of blankets. Next year, they would be able to sleep on steamed buns. There was no morning court today. The emperor led an even grander group of civil and military officials to the northern suburbs to worship. Since they were not burdened by the morning court, the officials were all refreshed. The commoners who ran over to get some of the aura of the officials had their eyes opened. Some of the commoners who were distant relatives of the high-ranking officials in the procession were bragging proudly about how close they were. The neighbors who knew them well laughed but did not say anything. Some of the commoners who were several streets away were shocked when they heard this. 60% of the commoners were there for the new Minister of War, Chen Zhibao. The other 30% were curious about what kind of young man the heir of Beiliang was. The commoners were like this. Even if they had grown calluses from hearing His Royal Highness speak ill of him, they were still shocked when he did the magnificent feat of tearing apart 100 zhang of land. Even if the perfected ones in the Taoist temples in the capital said that it was not worth mentioning that he relied on an otherworldly item to do so, the commoners still thought too highly of the heir of Beiliang. If there were not 100,000 playboys in Tulu and city who played with swords and sabers, there were at least 10,000 of them. Which one of them had this ability? It seemed that this white-haired young man from Beiliang was not someone to be bullied. While they were muttering, the commoners also had their own plans. In the future, if they followed the crowd and cursed Beiliang, should they show some mercy? If this fell into the ears of the heir of Prince Liang and his son, wouldn't they be in trouble? Chen Zhibao was dressed in a red embroidered robe. Unfortunately, he did not mention the plum wine. The emperor had purposely arranged for him to walk alone in the procession. The women of the capital, no matter if they were from a noble family or from a humble family, were all captivated by him. Nearby, the king of Yanqi, Zhao Yi, the king of Guangling, Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, Zhao Ying, the king of Huainan, and Zhao Sun, the king of Jing'an, were almost all taken away by Chen Zhibao. They were all princes wearing yellow python robes, and they deliberately distanced themselves from a white-haired prince wearing eye-catching white python robes. A young blind man came down to the roadside with the help of his maid Xinghua. He did not insist on squeezing into the crowd, but just stood quietly at the outer edge of the thick crowd of onlookers. When Su Fengnian rode past on the street, Xinghua reminded him softly. Blind Lu Su, who had rushed over from Xiangfan City, looked up with a solemn expression. They sat opposite each other in Yongzi Alley and played 10 rounds of chess from noon until dusk. It was an unforgettable experience. Xinghua carefully reached out to protect the scholar who the old king of Jing and wanted her to protect with her life. The old king only wanted him to live, so she did not hope that one day the new king would want him to die. At the very least, she did not want him to die in the hands of Xinghua. There was a tacit understanding between Xinghua and him, so they talked without restraint. She asked softly, "Young master, do you know the heir of Bailiang?" Lu Su did not hide it. He smiled and said, "I'm blind, so I can't say that I've met him once. When I was gambling chess in Yongzi Alley, I earned a lot of copper coins from Heir Su. 10 rounds of chess, I earned a total of 110 copper coins." Xinghua smiled and said, "He also knows how to play chess? Didn't he lose his helmet and armor to you?" Lu Su shook his head and said, "His chess skills are quite good. He has a lot of unreasonable moves, so it was not easy for me to win." The master and servant stayed for a while and were about to leave. Xinghua suddenly turned around and stared at an old scholar who was coming from afar. She was not afraid of a scholar who could not tell his real age, but the hidden qi made Xinghua, a death warrior, feel as if she was facing a great enemy and rushed over. Lu Su patted her arm, bowed and asked, "Are you Mr. Yuan?" The man smiled vaguely and said, "The editor of Hanlin Academy, Xiu Yuan Pu." Lu Suan stood still and looked calm. There was no surprise, or fear. Yuan Pu, or Yuan Benshi, walked a few steps closer and ignored Xinghua, who was like a tigress. He continued to speak with his vague but authentic Beijing accent. "Young Master Lu, you've spun a cocoon around yourself. It's a waste of your talent." Lu Su shook his head and said, "The new temple has a new climate. No matter how small the temple is, the number of pilgrims will not be too small. No matter how big the old temple is, it will leak in the rain and leak in the wind. Even if you were my abbot, you wouldn't want to go there. Besides, no matter how many pilgrims there are in the old temple, there will be a lot of disputes. I don't even know when I will be kicked out of the temple. Besides, Lu Suan is blind and doesn't know people, but he knows his own weight. He doesn't want to be the next Song family." Yuan Benshi seemed to be amused. Even Nailan Yusi, who was as smart as Lu Su, was not in the mood to talk. He said, "Young Master Lu, don't forget why this old man of the Song family died and why the old temple of the Song family collapsed." Lu Su said calmly, "Ordinary rich families harm their descendants with their wealth. The Song family killed the future generation with their scholarship and deserved to die. Besides, Mr. Yuan, don't forget who borrowed my knife to support the young phoenix of the Song family." Yuan Benshi smiled and then sighed. "I have chosen more than 10 prime ministers, and Song Kelly is the least eye-catching. I'm afraid that even Nailan Yusi would have to leave the capital to think of this plan." Lu Su shook his head again and said, "Mr. Nailan's plan is not in the capital or even in the imperial court. You and Mr. Yuan go our separate ways. Naturally, you won't spend too much time thinking about these things. It's inevitable that you will miss something." Yuan Benshi was lost in thought. Yuan Benshi asked slowly, "You are indebted to the Prince of Bailiang for recommending you. What will you do?" Lu Su asked back, "Isn't it the bottom line of a counselor to plan for his position and politics?" Yuan Benshi smiled and said, "I don't believe in such high-sounding words at all when others say it. But since it's you, Lu Su, I'm 70 to 80% convinced." Xinghua was just a man of sacrifice who lived in a corner of Xiangfan. Even if he was talented, he could never imagine that the old Confucian scholar who talked with child Lu was the chief counselor of the Liang dynasty who was above tens of thousands of people and not below one person. However, no matter how ignorant and inexperienced Xinghua was, he still knew how powerful Nalin Yusi was. Not to mention the rumors about Nalin and the king of Yen having a habit of cutting their sleeves, Nalin himself was a well-deserved top strategist. Right now, Xinghua was having a headache over how to explain what she had seen and heard today to Prince Jinggan, Zhao Sun. How could she not be overly personal and yet not cause the new Prince Jinggan to suspect young Master Lu? Yuan Benshi asked, "Why didn't you go to Baoyang?" Lu Su smiled and said, "I wanted to go, but Su Fengyan didn't take me out of Yongzi Alley." Yuan Benshi laughed and turned to Xinghua. He directly told Xinghua his real name that even Lu Su didn't know, Lu Lingbao. "I talked with Lu Su just now. You can report it to Zhao Sun as it is. If you want to live a few more years with your young master, don't mention it again." Xinghua's face turned pale. Yuan Benshi said, "Goodbye." Lu Su hesitated and said to Xinghua, "Thank you, Mr. Yuan, for giving me a 10-year life-saving charm." Xinghua was confused, but he still followed the example of a girl from an ordinary family and curtsied. Yuan Benshi waved his hand and turned to leave. Xinghua's lips trembled and asked softly, "Young master, life-saving charm? What do you mean?" Lu Su said frankly, "Our king of Jing and is suspicious by nature. Before he becomes famous, he can bear it. Once he becomes powerful, he will inevitably get carried away and settle old scores with others. Mr. Yuan, no matter how powerful he is, he doesn't dare to provoke you. This gentleman met me today to give me a life-saving charm. Giving it to me is naturally giving it to you." Xinghua said with a sad face, "This sentence will also rot in my stomach. Young master, please don't worry." Lu Su suddenly rubbed Xinghua's hair and smiled softly, "Lu Lingbao, this name is blessed." Xinghua suddenly smiled brightly, "Thank you for your auspicious words." Lu Su turned his head and looked, and said to himself, "Baoyang."